Marshall to kick us off.
Great. Thank you so much, Cody. Good afternoon, council members and members of the public joining us in person and online. I am Megan Marshall, the Executive Officer for the California Interagency Council on Homelessness. Another quick housekeeping request: if you're at a table and your sign is not double-sided, if you would not, and I think it's primarily on that side of the room, if you wouldn't mind flipping it so folks can get a peek at your name. Thank you so much. I have the pleasure of opening our meeting today. Thank you for your all commitment, both council members and the public, in joining our efforts to end and prevent homelessness in California. A few reminders before we begin. This is a 3-hour meeting, so please get comfortable and enjoy your stay. And while we will do our best to keep this time frame, there's a possibility we may go over to hear what members of the public might have to contribute to our very important conversation. Council members were provided a briefing packet. I've heard from quite a few that they missed the actual briefings that we typically are known to provide. So I appreciate you all reviewing those materials before joining today. We will try to leave some time for council members to ask general questions toward the end of the meeting. But if we run out of time, please feel free to reach out to Cal ICH staff for any questions after the meeting adjourns. Just to give a quick overview of the agenda, which again is included in your packet. We'll begin with a call to order, our tribal land acknowledgement and roll call, consent calendar, council co-chair opening remarks, executive officer updates, advisory committee recommendations. Our presentation, very exciting for you all today, is on the homeless data integration system. Our new action plan, of course, which you all should know pretty fluently, I would say, at this point in time. General public comment, final remarks, and adjournment. So with that, I will now pass it to Cal ICH Tribal Liaison Vivila Blossoming Bear to read the tribal land acknowledgement. And Vivila is joining today virtually.
Good afternoon. Thank you. My name is Vivila Blossoming Bear. My people are from the Choctaw Nation. I'm an individual with lived experience in homelessness, and it is my pleasure to serve as the tribal liaison for Cal ICH. We wish to acknowledge that Sacramento is the unceded homeland of the Southern Maidu, Valley and Plains Miwok, the Nisinan people, the Patwin Wintun people, and members of the Wilton Rancheria tribe who have inhabited this landscape since time immemorial. We extend our gratitude to the ancestors of all California Native American tribes and their descendants, as we recognize that wherever we are joining from in our virtual community today, we're all on California Native American land. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivila. Will Cal ICH staff member Claire Bannerman please call the roll?
Absolutely, thank you. So this is the attendance roll call for the council. We need a majority of members or a quorum to officially meet and hold this meeting. Council members, after I call your name, please say present or here, and apologies if I mispronounce any names. Tamika Moss.
Present.
Dr. Mark Galley.
Good afternoon, present.
Tomas Aragon.
Present.
Alisa Becerra.
Present.
Gina Buccieri Harrington.
Present.
Stephanie Clendenin.
Present.
Susan Damaris.
Present.
Kim Johnson.
Present.
Tina Johnson Hall.
Present.
Veronica Lewis. William McGee. All right. Sandy Nieves. Rebecca Rowan O'Shaughnessy. Lindsay Sin.
Present.
Diana Tosh.
Present.
Glenn Sang. Gustavo Velasquez.
Present.
Marina Wyant.
Present.
And Joe Xavier. Wonderful, thank you. We have a quorum, and I will move us on to the next agenda item. Next slide, please.
Great, thank you all. And that was good practice for using our mics in this room. So thanks everyone for doing that. So we're moving on to the consent calendar. So this is the list of materials we sent out before the meeting that we vote to approve on, or we don't anticipate further discussion. Council members are welcome to bring forth discussion on these items if they so choose. So today the consent calendar contains 2 items, I think for the first time in Cal ICH history. The first item is adopting our meeting summary from the November 30th, 2023 council meeting. We already received one note to replace one of the names that we misattributed in one of the quotes on that. So we will do that and make sure the correction is there. It should be correct in your packets as well. But other than that, it's the council meeting summary as it stands, and then adopting the recommendations that we heard last meeting from our state funding and programs working group on racial equity data collection. So if we go to the next slide, I just have a quick slide here, just as a reminder of what we talked about. So these were recommendations presented by our state funding and programs working group co-chairs at our last meeting. We didn't hear any specific edits or feedback other than positive comments on that. So we decided to bring it back to you all today for formal adoption in the consent calendar. As a reminder, these recommendations will help with the coordinated collection and use of racial equity data across all of our funding and programs. So these follow the HUD racial equity data collection standards that recently came out, and adopting these would mean, committing to follow these guidelines on racial equity data collection in our funding and programs going forward. So that is what those recommendations are in your packet. So I just wanted to explain that, since we usually just have that, we in the past have just had the meeting summary. So just wanted to call that out before we did any vote.
Okay, so before proceeding, since this is an action item that will result in a vote, we will now open it up to public comment. Please keep comments to the items in the consent calendar only. If your comment is not related to the consent calendar, there will be time for general public comment at the end of this meeting. We will take public comment from the people in person first and then move online. If you are connected through Zoom, select the raised hand icon in the meeting window on your computer, and we will call on you to unmute yourselves and allow for comment. For those connected by phone, you may press *9 to indicate that you would like to comment. And then once we call on you, you'll be instructed to unmute yourself. Every person will have 2 minutes to make their public comment. Are there any public comments? I know we have one in person, and then I'm just putting a call to raise your hands online. And we have a timer. Great. So Gregory Fearon.
Thank you. My name is Gregory Farron. I'm here from Sonoma County in person. I sit on the mental health board, on the ARPA update working group, and am a longtime participant in our COC. All 3 in the last 3 weeks have been talking about this issue. So we really appreciate the fact that you're adopting guidelines and that you're going to be working with the counties in particular, because even at the county level, we're very, very interested in collecting the information and using it to shape our policies. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Gregory. And do we have any hands online? Okay, no hands. So I will now move us on. Are there any comments from the council? Okay, great. So would anybody like to motion to approve the consent calendar?
So moved, and I offer a motion to approve the consent calendar. Is there a second?
There's a second. There we go. Great, thank you very much. So for this voting, since we are in person, we will be voting through raised hands. And you will raise your hand either for yes, no, or abstain, and I will call each one individually. So the first, if you approve and say yes to the consent calendar, please raise your hand. Great, thank you. If you vote no, please raise your hand. And if you vote abstain, please raise your hand. Wonderful, thank you. The motion passes, and I will turn it back to Cody Ziegler to facilitate the next item.
Great. And I am actually going to turn it over to our co-chairs for their opening remarks. I believe Secretary Moss, you will be starting us off.
Thank you, Cody. Well, good afternoon. I'm so pleased to be with you all first in person and also in my newly appointed role as the Secretary of BCSH. It's really interesting to be in the seat of co-chair now, having been a member on this council. So I'm really excited to continue our work together. I've been on the job now for a month and a week. And so I have tons of information and knowledge already. But mostly because we have such a long agenda, I want to keep my remarks brief. I'm just excited to roll up our sleeves and get to work. The issues of homelessness and housing insecurity across the state of California are more urgent than ever. And we are not slowing down in this moment where we are facing a budget deficit. I think there's a real opportunity for us to excel and actually focus on the momentum that has been happening within ICH and with this council. And I really look forward to not only sort of aligning our goals with the amazing work of the advisory council, advisory committee, our LEAB, all of the contributors to people who care and want to help us do this work, but how do we actionize the work? How do we actually figure out how to get our local partners, all of our the state family to work in concert to deliver on outcomes for the community? It has been an incredible honor to sit on this council and see all of the work that the staff have done so far. I'm super excited about the data. I know it's a nerdy thing to say, but I actually am, because when I get excited about data, it's not just for data's sake. It's about how do we use the data to actually provide tools and resources to improve conditions for the people that we care about. So HDIS is on its way. It's offering incredible insight as to how we can focus on population level impacts in communities across the state. I get to sit next to this rock star here, Dr. Galley, and roll up our sleeves as we begin to institutionalize some of the work that is on the horizon. So I mostly sit here in gratitude and am excited to figure out how do we lead with that sense of urgency and not, we're done talking, y'all. I think we know enough about what we need to do. The writing, the direction, the data is here. And so I'm excited to work with all of you in figuring out how we can make homelessness rare, brief, and one time for real, not just in theory. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Tamika. I've been looking forward to this. It's going to be a lot of fun working with you on this side. You said interesting to change roles. I want to hear a little bit more about what that means. But yesterday we had a cabinet secretaries meeting, and Lindsay and I had a chance to hear Tamika as the newcomer try to really ground us in community, really talk about our work is something we've got to connect back to community. And I just want to thank you for bringing that already to an environment where we'd like to think we're always doing that, but in reality, we don't do it as well as we can and should. And so I feel this great sense of comfort and confidence that that's one of the many things you're going to bring to this council a little bit more deeply in the prep conversations and how we drive to it. We hear the comments from the individual who traveled up from Sonoma to say, you know, hey, they're hungry for some support, some guidance. And I think it's a really exciting time to have your brand of leadership here. And I'm looking forward to working with you and getting into some good trouble. I want to also just say, since we last met, a big deal happened. Prop 1 passed. And I'm really proud of having had a small part to do with that, with Lindsay, with Tamika, with others around this table, to think about how we really take an opportunity that probably needed to be refreshed, modernized, add some additional resources. And as the governor said, it's not all about the resources, it's about the policy change and about the driver. But just to highlight a few things, There's a big bond that we have to get to immediately figure out how to get out on the streets and into our communities to make a difference right away. But also the move of 30% of what was the Mental Health Services Act funding into housing interventions. By my last count, that could be over $1 billion a year, right? So a lot of people said we don't have an ongoing source to support things like rental subsidies and ongoing support for housing. This is an ongoing roughly $1 billion that our county partners, and I say that seriously, our county partners, right? We have to partner with them to do this right. But even in some expensive counties, that could mean 40,000 people with complex behavioral health needs getting housed because of this in an ongoing way. So just to lift up your urgency, Prop 1 made this council's work even more urgent than it might have felt a week or two ago. And I just want to say that very clearly, publicly, and how do we move this forward? I know there's a lot to figure out, but each of you around this table, whether you're listening online or you're here in the public in person, we need to work together to make this a reality and kind of deliver on that promise. The buildup, though, Prop 1 is just part of the story, right? There's so many other important things that are happening. Cal HHS and DHCS were selected to be part of a conversation at the federal level with the Interagency Council, the Federal Interagency Council on Homelessness, talking about how we connect health and housing and homelessness needs a little bit more together, a new accelerator project. We were selected for that in February. We're excited to roll up our sleeves, see how that aligns with CalAIM and the work of Joe Xavier and Susan DeMorris and others who've been thinking about how we build this work up. And then Director Johnson's team in the ongoing work of getting out prior commitments out into the community, I think released over $100 million recently as part of a round of the community care expansion program to get more units, beds for people, largely older Californians, people with disabilities, into stable housing. So I think this all starts to add up. It all starts to feel impactful. They're not just big round numbers. They are real lives getting an opportunity to exit some challenging situations that they face today. So with that, I think there's so much good to look forward to. I think a lot to be proud of that this commission had a hand in. We've been talking a lot in my agency about connecting the dots between our departments and bringing things together. And I think today's conversation and all of the work in the future, Tamika, with your leadership in this seat, I think we're going to connect dots. We're going to imagine new dots, and we're going to do some very exciting things. So I look forward to that.
Great. Thank you so much. And I will pass it to Executive Officer Megan Marshall.
Thank you, Cody, and thank you, co-chairs, for your opening remarks. I don't think that's the first time that Dr. Galley has been referred to as a rock star. He took that quite in stride. So as the council is aware, fiscal year 23-24 has and continues to be a year of significant transition for Cal ICH, not just transition for the council, but for Cal ICH as an entity under the umbrella of the BCSH family. So March 24th marked my 1-year anniversary serving in this appointment. And as I reflect on 12 long and short months, want to take an opportunity to thank my staff for their sincere dedication and commitment to this daunting work. Cal ICH is statutorily charged with aligning the collective resources and brain trust in this room to end and prevent homelessness in California. That's not something that our staff says or takes lightly. It's something that everyone in Cal ICH feels personally called to do. So my never-ending gratitude to my staff and team. So as this fiscal year comes to an end and we near the complete transition of several billions of dollars in existing grant programs and 22 of our staff to our sister Department of Housing and Community Development, it presents an opportunity for Cal ICH to reimagine itself with a sense of urgency that we've heard both co-chairs speak with. And so I look forward to our June council meeting, which will be the end of the year wrap up, where we'll use the majority of the time to share with you our vision for the future of Cal ICH as we move into, I think, some particularly budgetarily trying times, but again, acting with a sense of urgency that our communities deserve. So with that, I'd like to take the last few minutes of my time to introduce our colleague and supporter of the council, Hafsa Kaka, the governor's senior advisor on homelessness. So with that, I'll let Hafsa introduce herself.
So much. And Megan, I just want to say congratulations. And since the time I've been here, I've seen incredible leadership by your part in your team. So hi, everybody. A lot of familiar faces. So my name is Hafsa Keka, and I'm the senior advisor on homelessness for Governor Newsom. And my role actually was close to when you actually got appointed. I was appointed about a year ago. I'm 2 months shy. It is a new role that is specifically in cabinet affairs. And it was designed to really have sort of an external accountability piece. As you know, the governor has been very vocal about accountability, transparency, and also accessibility when it comes to working with the general community and local governments. My background is in local government, so I've worked for several mayors, several counties, and kind of got to see that other side of how there are decisions being made and how regionally coordinated efforts are being done. So I have the wonderful pleasure to work alongside with Cal ICH in my portfolio, along with CalSTA and CalVet, Elisa. I know we're always on the phone, but really just making sure that administration's priority on addressing homelessness is top of mind. I do work with Ann Patterson, Jason, Elliott, and James Hacker and Miles very closely. We work with legislation too, and really not only providing support in the work that all of you esteemed folks do day in and day out, but also making sure that there is a strategy attached to continue making sure that the governor's priority is across California. So with that being said, I just thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Hafsa. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Cody for the remainder of the agenda.
Okay, luckily not the whole remainder of the agenda. You don't have to hear just from me today, but I will move us to our next agenda item. And so that we're going to talk, I'm very excited. I think Secretary Moss, you talked about being a nerd around data. I think we have a lot of similar nerdiness in this room right now. I'm very excited to talk about our advisory committee recommendations and the next steps that we have put together on those. Great. So as a reminder, this is a follow-up from a conversation we had in September 2023, where the advisory committee to this council had been requested to put together, what they thought were recommendations around state funding and programs to make them coordinated and effective. They presented those recommendations in September of 2023. You all heard them, you asked questions, you asked for clarifications, et cetera. So we have provided you in advance of this meeting both answers to those questions and clarifications in the form of a memo, as well as the result of Cal ICH staff's work to help basically translate those recommendations into potential steps for the council to take using the resources it has available. So yeah, you can see the timeline here. In September, we heard from the advisory committee. We talked about that in November at the advisory committee meeting, just to get them sort of aligned on what they wanted to, how they wanted to respond to your questions. In February of this year, we showed them these proposed next steps, and they approved those and said, this looks good, like it would move our work forward or the recommendations forward. And then today, we are presenting them to you all for discussion and a potential vote for adoption. So one of the things that's not on this timeline exactly is the work that Cal ICH staff did. And so one of the roles that our statewide policy team takes is that when you all hear recommendations, right, or you get recommendations from the advisory committee, from our lived experience advisory board, from our working groups, right, our team really spends time with those recommendations to understand what does the council have at its disposal, what resources does it have, where we can actually start work on these recommendations. We can't always address every recommendation, right? It's not within the council's purview to do every single thing always, but we try to identify the pieces that the council could move forward and then bring those to you as something to consider. So that's sort of what we're doing here. And on the next slide, you'll see the recommendations, or then, sorry, it gets a little confusing. The proposed action steps that we put together based on the recommendations. So those are in your memo, and what you can see in the memo is really a one-to-one, like what was the original recommendation and what is the action we are proposing to address that recommendation. Some of them are repeated across the recommendations, so we sort of summarized them here by sort of what group would be taking on potentially responsibility for those action steps. I'm going to read these out, so forgive me, but I feel like it's helpful for people to hear them as well. So there's sort of 4 groups that we identified as potentially resources for the council to help move this work forward. It's the State Funding and Programs Working Group, the Racial Equity Working Group, the Lived Experience Advisory Board, and Cal ICH staff. And so all of these steps would sort of suggest that those groups take forward some of the work in order to pursue or to move us towards the recommendations we got from the advisory committee. So for the State Funding and Programs Working Group, there's a few, you can see many of the bullet points are here. So we would be requesting that they create recommendations on standard funding application questions, reporting requirements, outcomes, and definitions to help unify state funding applications as much as possible. The working group could create recommendations on the ways state programs can design funding requirements to reduce administrative barriers to communities, with some examples there. In partnership with the Racial Equity Working Group, the State Funding and Programs Working Group could review common contract requirements that create barriers for small, rural, and tribal communities and create recommendations to alleviate those barriers. And then finally, they could identify opportunities within existing funding to compensate people with lived experience of homelessness in a peer support or advisory capacity. So for the Racial Equity Working Group, there's one proposed action step. It would be for them to identify opportunities for smaller organizations to receive guidance or mentorship from more established entities in funding applications, including identifying the right balance of technical assistance opportunities for various local jurisdictions. And then on the next slide, we will see the other 2 groups. Great, thank you. So for the Lived Experience Advisory Board, their action here would be to create a best practices sort of document for how to include people with lived experience of homelessness within homelessness services programs. So really relying on them using their expertise to sort of direct that work. And then for Cal ICH staff, a few things that fit into our purview, right? So creating a central location for all state homelessness program information, including funding and timelines, tasking council departments and agencies to provide updated information to that source. Cal ICH staff in partnership with the Racial Equity Working Group to identify technical assistance opportunities focused on specific populations, such as smaller communities, tribal entities, BIPOC communities, and making that information publicly available in a central location. Creating a best practices document for working with tribal entities, including grant making and data collection, and summarizing existing research on service needs and costs for individuals with complex health conditions and best practices to support housing stability and improve health outcomes. So you can see there's sort of a theme to each of those groups, what type of work they were assigned, right? These are really the groups that support the council. And so these are sort of the steps that we thought those groups could take to help us move forward the recommendations from the advisory committee. So in a minute, we'll, propose that the council potentially adopt these recommended action steps for those groups to take. Before we do that, though, I just want to open it up for discussion to see what folks think, if there are comments, questions about these proposed steps. And then, yeah, we can just start the discussion now.
Cody, if I may,
Yeah.
just want to make a note that the advisory committee provided recommendation on funding length and design that what we found to be outside of the scope of the purview of the council. So these are not the only recommendations that were made, but these were the ones that were found to be within the scope of the work of the council. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. Yeah, Veronica. You should push that button, yeah.
Sorry, I missed the tutorial. Thank you to the advisory committee members for taking all of the input and feedback and questions and preparing something for us. One clarifying question, you're asking us to adopt it. I just want to be clear. Are we adopting it so that it will eventually be incorporated in the action plan we'll be working on later this year, or is this a separate activity from that?
That's a great question. So the adoption will be of these action steps, right? Not necessarily of the original recommendation language, but of the steps to sort of move towards those recommendations that are here in your packet. So if this is work that we're doing, right, that our working groups are doing, that our LEAB is doing, that our staff are doing, we would definitely include those in the action plan as sort of actions that we are taking to move the work forward. So it would be included in there.
Okay, well then with that said, just one thing for the racial equity work group. Since I'm a part of it, I think the one recommendation is fine, but something that I have talked about and other people have talked about in these spaces is related to figuring out some type of matrices to measure where departments are on the spectrum of actually having equity-based decision-making, shifting processes and policies and resource allocation, which obviously takes a lot of time. And so for me, unless that sits somewhere else, and I think it's appropriate for this, and our executive officer can weigh in, but I think that piece of it should sit with the racial equity work group.
Yeah, and I should clarify, that's a good point. I should clarify, this would be on top of the work that the racial equity working group is figuring out to do, right? So it wouldn't replace that work necessarily. And this one bullet point is not the sole list of all the things the racial equity working group would be doing in the action plan. So this would just be making sure that we're talking to, this is like, I think, a way for the council to talk to the working group and say, hey, here's something we'd like you to work on, right? But it wouldn't necessarily replace all of the other work that's going on. Yeah, go for it.
Is this on?
Yep.
It is on. I did find the button. So I just, in terms of the actions, I just wanted to kind of call out a couple of them, and if they're already accounted for somewhere else, then, so be it. On 2.6, when we talk about equity, we really should include disability as an essential element of equity. And I think particularly important when you think about the intersectionality of disability with all other elements of equity. And I think particularly important for those with individuals, I mean, particularly to lift up the capacity building for the aging system and the disability system in serving this population. And then on the other one that I would lift up here is in the 2.7, the need to include a couple of other things in there when we talk about a high medical needs. Think of things like personal care attendance for individuals that need supports with activities of daily living, home modifications, assistive technologies, and then transportation when you need it to where you need it. I think those are all going to be some key pieces of addressing the high medical needs population.
Yes, thank you so much for that. I really appreciate that feedback. We can definitely include disability within the definition of equity. I think that's a really important thing to include. So thank you for bringing that to our attention, that wasn't there. And then also acknowledging the high medical needs of folks when we're looking at that item. Can definitely include both of those.
Cody, I just wanted to, first of all, just appreciate the sort of crosswalk you all have done to sort of identify what groups should be doing what. It is a lot we're asking of our groups to kind of go and opine on these issues. So I'm curious about how we as a council can support their deliberation around what they're considering and whether or not we as a council should also have some action steps as we are asking our leave and advisory committees to do a lot of the work, just wondering how we can inform some of that work in between our meetings, because many of us are already thinking about that in our day jobs. And so I just would love to make sure we're integrating that knowledge for the folks on these bodies.
Yeah, thank you, Secretary Moss. If I can make a plea of sorts to directors and agency secretaries in the room, staff who have decision-making authority within your respective departments and agencies to support the working groups that we've been tasked with. We have 5, 2 of which are operational, 3 of which have been named, I think, for many years at this point, but have not been operational, mostly because of capacity. And so while we appreciate any staffing support that you all can offer, the sense of urgency that we're all operating with now would necessitate staff who have decision-making authority on behalf of your respective departments and agencies.
Yeah, and thank you, Megan. And I would add to that too. I think one of the things that the working groups and that all of the groups that support the council can really benefit from is like some clear asks from the council, right? Because they've been working to sort of determine their direction and come up with priorities based on what the action plan says. But I think really part of the goal is to get you all to see them as a resource, right? So if there are specific questions that, you know, the 20 people here don't have the time to research on their own, right? Like this is a space for that work, utilizing your all staff. So thank you. And so, yeah, I think having sort of clear directions and saying this is like an outcome that we want to see from this group, whether it's these action steps or other questions, right? I think it is really helpful for that work. Yeah.
Thank you. I also want to say thank you to the staff and the advisory committee for these recommendations and the proposed actions. I just want to call out specifically, there are a few of them suggesting improvements on reducing administrative burden to applicants, streamline application, reporting, monitoring. All that is very important. As we know, we happen to have on this front of funding, you know, local jurisdictions and other providers, developers, a very fragmented system in the state of California. We've reduced burden. We estimate that we reduced on the application front for low-income affordable housing, the time it takes once a housing development is entitled, all that capital stacking that needs to happen, which is extremely complex in our state. We've reduced that from an average of 3 years to 18 months, but there's still a lot more that we can do. And there's a lot of expertise in this room. The latest legislative mandate is AB 519. Some of us are starting to work on that just to have recommendations for like a unified application, you know, some of the things that this action step seems to be leading towards, except this broadens, right? Because there's a lot of entities that are still not involved. We're just talking about affordable housing programs with our friends at College FA, the Treasurer's Office, with the limit allocation committee and the tax credit allocation committee, HCD. So it's a lot of work already in order to reduce even further the administrative burden. But when it comes to homelessness programs, there's a lot, you know, there's a bunch of other programs that aren't integrated in this effort. And I think this, using the expertise of this process that we are undertaking on the low-income housing side can really benefit how additional programs think of further streamlining application and unifying monitoring reporting. So very pleased to see those proposed action steps. Thank you for all the work on that.
I'll just add, Gustavo, I think it's really good flag that there's a lot of work happening that can facilitate some of these recommendations, and frankly, not just keeping them as recommendations, but manifesting in all the work. And I know Director Johnson Kim and I have talked a lot about her sort of leaning in on the work with different tribes across California. I think there's a lot of great expertise that has developed around the table through directors and leaders and secretaries, but also our teams. And to Megan's point, making sure we're tapping into that. Through so much of this, I know there's equity specific points that are being raised here, but that through line is equity actually, right? When you think about what we're talking about, when you get community entities capable to compete for funding to do the work with people with lived experience who look and speak like those that are being served, I think makes a huge difference. And I know within Cali HHS, that's been a theme around equity and how it manifests in so many other ways. But drawing into that, not just of our partners on the various associated boards and councils to this council, but also within. So, you know, building on your point, Megan, how we draw that out into this, I think would be really, really helpful.
Any other comments on these recommended action steps? Yeah, please.
The 2.1, which was one of the recommendations that's outside of the council purview, I understand why it's outside of the council purview. However, the inability of organizations to administer these programs with all of the heavy lifting, the compliance and guidelines require when it comes to government contracting, I'm wondering if there is still something we can think about to understand how to better support the nonprofit tribal organizations that are on the ground doing the work, that are telling you time and time again, they can't afford to do the work. And so I understand technically we can't have a recommendation related to administrative dollars, percentage, and that level of detail, but I just want to still lift it up because it's a reality. And with all of the rising costs in this economic environment, the insurance is out of this world. We're experiencing a crisis across the state in all different sectors, but the nonprofit sector in particular, for folks in the homeless response system, behavioral health system, triple, quadruple amounts. And so there's some serious risk to organizations. Some have gone out of business because they can't afford the unfunded administrative costs. And so I understand it's regulatory in some cases, legislative, but I still just want to flag it and lift up beyond just acknowledging we know it's an issue. Are there any opportunities to do something, even if it's exploratory, as it relates to a recommendation?
I will say that we have an opportunity again with the transition of our grant programs to offer that deeper technical assistance and expand who we offer that technical assistance to. Our director of local initiatives, Courtney Tacker, is here, has been in several meetings with myself with communities who are struggling internally, externally, who don't have nonprofits to support the work that they're being funded to do. We met very recently with a nonprofit in Southern California who is being met with extreme hostility by local government. And so Cal ICH is taking the approach of supporting that entity who we know has done tremendous great work in that community to not just support, but alleviate some of the burden that comes with attempting to provide these very challenging services in a challenging climate. So I will say in the spirit of piloting, those are opportunities that Cal ICH is exploring in this next fiscal year.
Yeah, I appreciate that because capacity development to be able to administer these grants is one thing that I think is a part of it, but I'm talking about the dollar and cents piece, right? Where you figure out how to do it, but you literally can't afford to operate the business because of the unfunded non-direct support costs that are not now covered through administrative costs for the reasons I just described. So I think that's good. And I think that the capacity development for the organizations, especially folks who have been left out of accessing these dollars, especially with Prop 1 and all these other things come into fruition, I think that's amazing. And I'm excited about that. And again, the dollar and cents piece of 10% no longer being sufficient. Some of these state cut are 5%, 7%. I mean, just with the astronomical costs is unrealistic. So again, I just want to lift it up, in particular for our department heads here, looking at how the other recommendations are framed. And obviously we won't get to it today per se, but to think about outside of the regulatory prescribed administrative rates, are there other opportunities to address the unfunded costs that keep being lifted up at the nonprofit level?
I'll jump in and just say, yes, we've got to dig into that issue a little bit more, meaning, get into what is it, where is the line, what are those costs, what have they done, hear from, providers and leaders of groups more specifically here, because we can impact that. It's not an overnight thing. I think you know that, many do, but there's been efforts, there's been quote best practices, things people have tried to make that a little better in pockets. And we can certainly talk about that. It's an important function of this council to lift those things up and hopefully figure out how to transition our approach to doing business in a way that ultimately drives the equity principles that I think we're all interested in being a part of. So I will say is, on behalf of the chairs of the council, to dig in a little bit more to that, it's helpful to hear it.
just building on that a little bit, I would love for, I think it's the funding committee who has the charge to center marginalized communities 2.5 in that recommendation. So just building on this conversation and to the secretary's point earlier related to tribes, I mean, there is a component of technical assistance that state entities are providing to prospective applicants and for those who are funded that I think this is speaking to a little bit, but I actually also think it speaks to 2.1 a little bit, and it's actually reciprocal. So to the extent that we are learning as state agencies also what is helpful to the point of Councilmember Lewis in funding and insurance and other components, I think we want to make sure that mechanism can go in both directions to lift that up. As an example, again, in the Department of Social Services work with tribes, what we assume some infrastructure components in some of our applications that may or may not exist, and they have been very clear in our government to government consultation with them kind of what the needs are to be able to even be ready to apply and what those supports need to look like in terms of time, in terms of resource, et cetera. So if there's a way we can make 2.5 that is centering marginalized communities a place where we're not only, again, putting forth technical assistance opportunities, but actually receiving from community what would be most helpful in being able to both apply, access funds, and maintain those going forward.
Sorry, I can't help myself, but to build off of that, I think part of what we've been talking a little bit about is technical assistance is often, here's how to do it the way we need you to do it. In actuality, we're trying to think about how do you get rid of technical assistance as a concept, but it's really a shared learning conversation so that we figure out what's going on in those settings where we can support the work actually happening. So just lifting up and saying the same thing Kim's saying, just a little differently as an approach, and how do we build that into the work here? I think no better place to try to do it.
Okay, Cody, we're nearly there. But I just wanted to speak to this directly also about how the state can offer guidance and support around how local jurisdictions are interacting with their service providers. I remember there was a time when I was running a direct service nonprofit and I was getting 80 cents on the dollar to run my services, and I had to fundraise the remainder of that money. And so I think the business model that we've been talking about is in question around we are asking folks to do much more. We are trying to find resources for communities to do much more, which means we may need to talk to our partners about how do we, in fact, reimagine the business model that allows folks to do more and higher quality more, right? Not just service delivery for the sake of it. So I just echo the comments around let's dig into this and really figure out how we can leverage state influence in our partnerships with localities to get creative.
We'll just also offer with tribal communities as well, how our cities and counties are interacting with nonprofits, with service provider organizations, but with their tribal communities as well. Friday will be the third and final in-person listening session, which these have been the first that Cal ICH has hosted in its existence, to hear specifically from tribal communities in Northern, Central, and Southern California, where surrounding neighboring tribes are also able to share space with us for us to hear directly from them. Appreciate the catch, Director Johnson and Secretary Galley. We made some course corrections early on in these listening sessions. Not so much, what can the state do to help you, but what can the state do to get out of your way, right? Those communities know better than us, certainly, how to address the needs of their members. And so very excited again for some of the initiatives that Cal ICH has underway.
Great. And please, no need to apologize to me if you all want to talk. The whole point is that there's discussion happening amongst the group, not that you're telling me things necessarily, although you're welcome to do that as well. But yeah, never need to apologize for having a robust discussion on something important. And I will say, just to sort of close the loop on one other thing, Secretary Moss, that you asked, which was like, what can you all do to support this work, right? I think a lot of this is going to be working groups, staff, lead members going out, looking into information, gathering information, proposing, potentially changes, thinking about things in different ways. And I think The challenge is like, how do we all here actually implement those things, right? Like, how do we take that and really do the work to push forward what they're saying? And so I think that's where a lot of the challenge comes in often. So it may be not immediately the thing that needs to happen, but down the line for sure. Any other comments? I've been told that I'm too comfortable with silence, so I'm going to keep us going. But yeah, so on the next slide, you'll see the proposal for adoption, right? It says, shall the proposed action steps be adopted to direct various bodies within CalICH to focus on implementing the recommendations to strengthen state funding and programs. That would be inclusive of the recommendations around including disability with equity and looking at high medical needs, as Director Xavier mentioned. And this is not the last time you all can ask these groups to look into things, to help you, to explore, right? Like, this is very much the beginning of that relationship. So don't feel like you need to have every idea in this set of actions. But before we can have a vote, we will turn it over to public comment. So I will pass it to Claire to facilitate public comment.
Right, so since this is an action item that will result in a vote, we will now open it up for public comment. Please keep comments to the item of the advisory committee recommendations only. If your comment is not related to this item, there will be time for general public comment at the end of this meeting. We will do in-person comments first, of which we have 2, and then we will move online to see if there are any hands raised. If you are connected through Zoom, please select the raised hand icon in the meeting window. And when we get to you, I will ask you to unmute. If you are joining by telephone, please press *9, and I will also call on you to unmute. There will be 2 minutes per public comment. All right, first we have Gregory.
Good afternoon. My name is Gregory Farron. I'm here representing today on this issue, HEPA, which is the Homeless Emergency Assistance Program Administration or Association. For those of you who don't really know what that means, let me give you a little bit of background. I was the first staff member hired in California to implement First Five in 1998. And those of us who were the founder, organizers, people who ran around the state organizing First Five commissions in every county and eventually a state commission, realized that one of the things we did best was once we had people in place, once we had a whole lot of folks who wanted to try to do that mission, we got them together in an association and built the First Five Association of California, and then took their family members, their clients, and put them together. HEPA has already begun to help you with your lived experience board by paying for some of the costs to get them together with their local county representatives. We encourage you to try to get those at the county level and those at the state level who have firsthand experience with your issues to be able to talk among themselves and to be able to bring recommendations to you. HEPA is pledged to fund those meetings. We would like to be able to go beyond that. We have, most of us, lots and lots of years of building local and state issues around coalitions, and we're looking for something to do to help homeless. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And next we have Ludmilla Bade.
Hello, Ludmilla Bade here. I just wanted, I'm not looking at all the detail on the recommendations, but I just wanted to highlight when I see unified funding, I get a little bit scared that sometimes some of the smaller projects, experimental things that aren't like kind of right down the middle of the main things that are being funded might get kind of pushed to the side. And I really want to highlight that, yes, it's great. Wonderful to have a fully unified funding so you don't have a lot of duplication. That'll really help. But one of the things that happens when staff gets busy at the local level, so like that, they start going, oh, well, we can only fund the main things because that's what people are focusing on. So I just want to say that having kind of a separate pages that highlight some of the possibilities that can be used with different kind of funding that are different from like the main body of things that they're trying to get done is really important. And that will actually help to make sure that things like outreach and the smaller community-based projects or different things that might not be funded by all of the funding streams are able to be supported. And it'll also help the administrators at the county level to be able to see, oh, such and such is highlighted. This is an opportunity where we can fund this project that we're trying to get done. I just want to make sure that things don't just get kind of clumped all together where it all has to be the same, because so many opportunities get missed when that happens. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ludmilla. So I will now move us to the online public comment section, of which we have 2 hands raised. The first is a phone number ending in 3713. I'll be allowing you to talk. You'll have 2 minutes.
Hi, this is Ruthless. So yeah, there's a council file in Los Angeles City Council called 19-1020. It's for a lived expertise body locally. And LASA endorsed it, but it's gonna die this year if no action is taken. And part of the reason why I escalate issues locally to this body that I'm speaking to right now is because we don't have one locally to do that. We don't have any way to raise grievances. I actually started my own hotline and meetings for people, and there's right now dozens of people being displaced from shelter motels that were purchased with Home Key and are now being shut down by the nonprofits that I guess acquired them. So that's a major problem. People need to be able to raise their issues. You need to be able to allow the people who are currently affected by homelessness to speak when they're trying to. And so if you could please try to reach out to LA City Council to advance Council File 19-1020 before it dies, because if it does, it will this year in a few months. I don't know how we'll get it back in front of City Council. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ruth. And Sydney Soto, I will be allowing you to speak. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. My name is Cindy Soto, and I am the chair of the Personal Assistant Service Council for LA County. We oversee the IHSS service for LA County, and we have been grappling with how to help people that are unhoused with IHSS, in-home support services, for the last couple of years. And you probably don't know that approximately 40% of IHSS recipients are in LA County, which is approximately 250,000 people. And we already have a provider shortage. We're in a crisis at that in LA County. And if we could have a dialogue, or if we could help in any way, when you're grappling with this issue, we would be more than happy to discuss this with you. Thank you.
Thank you. This ends our public comment. So now I will look to see if we have a motion to adopt.
We're looking for a motion.
I move to adopt the advisory committee's recommendations with the additions that Cody referenced just a few minutes ago.
Second.
Great, thank you, Executive Director Xavier and Veronica Lewis. All right, so we will be voting via raised hands again. So the categories will be as follows: yes, no, and abstain. So first, could you please raise your hand if you vote yes? Okay, great. Thank you. And just to go through the motions, please raise your hand if you vote no. And raise your hand if you abstain. Great, thank you. The motion passes.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. And thank you for the discussion on this and the engagement with the advisory committee and our working groups. I think something that we've been talking about is, how to make sure that those groups are all really engaged with you and in a back and forth discussion. So this is a really great start to that. So now I am going to move us to our next agenda item, item 6, which is about our homeless data integration system. And I am going to get off the mic and first pass it to Megan Marshall to start us off.
Thank you, Cody. So it's my privilege to introduce our next item, an overview of the California Homeless Data Integration System, also known as HDIS. You'll hear first from Cal ICH's Director of Data and Research, Cindy Bennett, and from Health and Human Services, Corinne Buchanan, followed by Director Johnson on the progress that we've made to share data with our colleagues at CDSS. A few things I'd like to ask council members to consider as you hear from these presenters. The first is, what data are your respective agencies and departments responsible for and have access to? And secondly, what data would you like to have access to? HDIS is very comprehensive, as you'll hear in a few minutes. But with that, I will pass it to Cal ICH's Director of Data and Research, Cindy Bennett. It's always a button. There you go.
Is it on now? Okay, great. As Megan said, I'm Cindy Bennett, the Director of Data and Research here at Cal ICH. Thank you for having me here today to talk about Cal ICH's Homeless Data Integration System, or you'll hear me call it HDIS because it's a bit of a mouthful. Today, I'll be sharing an overview of what HDIS is, and then a few examples of how HDIS data can support the work of the council and of council member departments. Cal ICH launched HDIS in 2021, creating the most comprehensive data system available to measure the provision of homelessness services in California. Much of this data was collected prior to HDIS existing, but it was never synthesized at the state level, and we didn't have access as state policymakers. HDIS is a statewide data system that's comprised of data from local homeless management information systems known as HMIS. Each of the local continuums of care maintains their own HMIS system in which service providers enter data on the clients they serve and the services provided. HDIS then compiles that information from these 44 local systems into a statewide data system. Cal ICH is the entity responsible for validating and processing that data to ensure we have high quality data. And we do this process quarterly so that we have new data 4 times a year. Next slide. HDIS contains over 300 data fields, which fall into 3 general categories. So just at a really high level, first, there's data on the projects that serve people at risk of or experiencing homelessness. That includes information on the type of project, its location in the state, the funding sources, whether those be federal or state programs, and then the bed inventory for our residential projects. HDIS also includes data about the people who are accessing homelessness services in California. That includes demographic data like race and ethnicity, disability status, age, gender, whether someone's a veteran, and so forth. And then for each of the clients in HDIS, we have data about their enrollments in housing and services projects. So the types of services they're receiving, their period of participation, and where they were living before and after enrollment in this program. So I know that was a very quick overview of the data included, but hopefully that paints a small picture. But we wanted to focus today really on how the data can be used and not just what information is collected. So the first area is measuring progress towards addressing homelessness. HDIS provides longitudinal data on outcomes, which can be used to measure progress towards the action plan activities. The data is also used to hold both the state and local jurisdictions accountable for how our programs are working to effectively prevent and end homelessness. And I'll give an example of that in a couple of minutes. HDIS also allows us to address disparities and inequities in who's experiencing homelessness in the state. HDIS allows disaggregating data by multiple demographic characteristics, such as race and ethnicity, gender, age, and household type. We can look at many of these factors at once to get really detailed information and identify disparities in our homelessness response services. For example, we could look at the services accessed by female identifying transitional aged youth and then further disaggregate that data by race. So we have a really powerful data source here. And then third, we can design programs to better meet the needs of people experiencing homelessness in California. So when we think about HDIS, we're trying to think not just about what data we have, but how we can take action from this information. And so by aggregating data on the clients served by state-funded homelessness programs and the outcomes of those programs, we can analyze the services being offered, identify gaps, and better tailor our state programs. Next slide. One example of how we're using HGIS is our work around implementing Assembly Bill 977, which created a new data reporting requirement for certain state-funded homelessness programs beginning in 2023. Grantees of these programs enter data into their local HMIS system, and then that data gets aggregated into HDIS. We've been working with many of our colleagues here at the table to implement AB 977. The bill applies to 10 programs named in statute, which are administered by HCD, CDSS, the California Community Colleges, and Cal-ICH. AB 977 also applies to all the new state-funded homelessness programs that commenced on or after July 1st, 2021. You may remember we surveyed all of your departments over the summer to see if you had new programs that met this definition, and we've now begun working with DHCS and CalVet on implementing AB 977 with some of their grantees. Cal-ICH's work with the administering departments has included implementing the first system to track state-funded homelessness programs in HDIS. So for the first time, we can actually see which clients are served by which state funding source. You'll see on the screen here a screenshot of dashboards that we are currently developing and that will be rolled out to our state partners in the month of April. These dashboards are for the administrators of these state programs at this time and not for the public, but they provide data on the types of housing and services, access through AB 977 projects, the demographics and characteristics of people served by AB 977, and the outcomes of these services. We're excited to provide this detailed level of data to our state partners for the first time. The next example we want to talk about today is the California System Performance Measures, which are a series of metrics developed by Cal-ICH to help the state and local jurisdictions assess their progress toward preventing, reducing, and ending homelessness. On the slide, you'll see what each of the measures are, but I'm not going to walk through them one by one for the sake of time. They hopefully look a bit familiar to you all as they were included in the last action plan implementation report. The California System Performance Measures focus on outcomes of our programs. So much of the data we see is often describing who's accessing services, but doesn't always take the step of asking, are those services working? Are we ending homelessness? Are clients ending in permanent housing? And so that's the goal of the system performance measures. We look at a range of outcomes at the local level, at the state level, and for various demographic groups. So examples of those include looking at the number of people exiting to permanent housing, the length of time people remain homeless while accessing services, and returns to homelessness after a client exits to permanent housing. HUD and the federal government has their own series of system performance measures, but Californians are much more expansive in several ways. We look at enrollments not only in residential projects, but also in service only and non-residential projects. Unlike the federal measures, California also measures each of these performance measures by race and ethnicity, gender, household type, and for various subpopulations. We provide this data back to our local partners to ensure they can track improvements in their outcomes at the local level. We also report the statewide measures in the action plan. And then the third use case on the next slide, I wanted to hand it off to our partners at HHS and Deputy Secretary Corinne Buchanan to talk about how HDIS can be used to support the work of our partners in the HHS departments.
Awesome. Thank you, Sydney, so much. California is very lucky to have your data and research prowess and chops. So thank you, Sydney, for the vision and leadership to make this work possible. I'm Corinne Buchanan, and I'm going to briefly interrupt this regularly scheduled programming with a quick infomercial because I am going to tell you about what we think is a really exciting opportunity that we're a part of right now in terms of data integration with the HGIS system. So what I've got for you on the slide here is just a brief overview of what we're up to. And what we're doing here is integrating, meaning taking the HGIS data and then integrating it into our California Health and Human Services Data Hub. And we're doing this for a couple of really exciting reasons, including the ability to understand who's being connected or not connected to some of our very important social safety net systems, being able to understand how someone moves through our systems, including the homeless response system in their lifetime, to be able to answer questions about entrances into homelessness after involvement in the child welfare system or other systems, and being able to understand really the impact of what we're trying to accomplish around preventing and ending homelessness. So we are pretty psyched about this opportunity. What we're doing is, as you've seen, taking the really robust data set that Sydney has created and maintains, and then combining it with a number of data sets within our Health and Human Services space. So I'll tell you that we're starting first with just two departments, the Department of Social Services and the Department of Healthcare Services. But our ultimate vision is to include many more data sets, which are represented here on the slide, including Healthcare, Office of Healthcare Information and Affordability, our Department of Public Health, our Department of State Hospitals, our Department of Rehab, and our Department of Developmental Services. So to the department directors who are not part of this first cohort, we have promised you that as soon as we finish the data sharing agreement with DSS and DHCS, we promise we're coming to you next because we're excited about being able to do this full integration. And then ultimately, just to be clear, this will be just, Sydney wanted me to make sure, and this is a really good point, the information will just be flowing from HGIS into CalHHS, so it won't necessarily mean that our data will go into HGIS because that would be a much more complicated data project. So we'll hold it in our CalHHS data system. And then this will allow us to be able to do, to be able to benchmark our work, to be able to do custom research and analytics, and to be able to ultimately, as we've said a number of times, drive good policy and think about how we can support cross-departmental coordination in particular. So we're very close to our first data sharing agreement, and we hope to be able to have our first data set coming into the CalHHS Data Hub by this summer. So you can look out for updates for me, hopefully by our next meeting, with some progress around this really exciting opportunity. And I'm going to turn it now to Director Johnson just to talk a little bit about what this work means for them in particular.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. And we too are thrilled and excited about data and these opportunities to further demonstrate the outcomes we're making with the integration of housing, health, and social services in the larger safety net. And also, again, to utilize that information to further improve our focus areas. At Social Services, we operate population-specific and focused housing and homelessness programs. Those that are supporting children and families experiencing poverty, those involved in the child welfare system, older adults and those with disabilities, those involved in our adult protective services system. And so again, just a phenomenal opportunity to look at the entirety of the array of those resources and services being provided and how that goes forward. We're looking to be able to make more informed policy decisions, identify service usage patterns and service gaps, assessing our program effectiveness, addressing racial and other inequalities among people experiencing homelessness, and also continuously improving our program outcomes to ensure that we are delivering client-centered services. There's three core questions and areas that we are hoping to focus on. It's understanding the extent of housing instability and homelessness amongst families and individuals engaged in the social safety net, as I referenced. And so just to give you an example, CalWorks, our program focused on supporting families experiencing poverty in California, where we can look and determine, are we seeing more occurrences of that population of families needing access to housing supports over time? time, matching again and seeing what we are learning about duration of access to the different components of the array of the social safety net and housing supports, and again, what's needed in terms of really looking at reducing and ending intergenerational poverty. We also, again, are improving equitable access to and outcomes through our programs. So again, this is really to me about transparency and being able to demonstrate how we are moving on changing the outcomes for especially related to race and ethnicity, but also looking at different demographics, such as youth who have exited our foster care system and other spaces there. But having the metrics to Councilmember Lewis, who always reminds us of that, to see how we are doing on the progress in that space and be able to disaggregate the data through the HDIS to be able to answer some of those questions. And then again, evaluating the impact of our program so we can track whether an individual or family exits a program to permanent housing, to temporary housing, or homelessness. But we are usually looking at a 6 month to a year after, and we'd like to look even further beyond that, where we are seeing good outcomes at those timeframes in terms of kind of being able to have housing stability sustained. But what do we know about 18 months after and 2 years after? And again, what interventions are making that success occur? We also, again, just really appreciate the opportunity more broadly to and I want to just back up a little bit to what Corinne referenced. We are grateful within the California Health and Human Services Agency to have a global data sharing agreement that allows us to facilitate and move these things. So data sharing, while it all sounds like that should be easy, to the point, it takes some time to negotiate the agreements and also just make sure we're always at the front end helping people understand where their data is going to be shared and why. The consent component that I think is critical too. But I think these data sharing agreements, and appreciate to be early on in the opportunity here to really make that then facilitate maybe an easier process for other departments to join us and be able to have that comprehensive look at the integration of housing, health, and social services. So grateful to be a part of this, and we are thrilled and excited to be able to really have more information to inform how we're moving forward in the outcomes that we see.
Thank you. And we're hoping to hear from some of you all on how HGIS data might work with the projects of your departments and where you see the future of HGIS. So we have a couple discussion questions up on the slide, and Cody will help keep us on time, but we'd love to hear how HGIS can support your work, and then also if you see other opportunities for HGIS to help the work of the council, of the upcoming action plan, which will be discussed later on the agenda today, and hear about some of those intersections. And I'm also happy to answer any clarifying questions because I know the data world can get quite in the weeds and technical quickly.
This is amazing. Congratulations. It's really, yeah, things that we've heard that counties have tried and still have not figured out in many cases. For you all at the state level to be able to figure this out is amazing. So congratulations to everybody, and thank you for your hard work, because I think that the information will formally be able to demonstrate the things that anecdotally we understand around all the different systems folks are touching, correlations between lengths of durations of services and exit destination and outcomes. So I'm just really excited about this opportunity, and it's amazing. And I'm really proud to be a part of this state that you all have figured that out. Couple of things. One, I think that it's important that the state is modeling for the county, the local jurisdictions, how to overcome the complexities of data sharing related to federal regulations and some of our own state regulations. And so I hope that as we move out of the, you all didn't use the word pilot, but as this really gets its footing, that Cal ICH can provide some tips and tools for the local jurisdictions, because it's critically important at that level as well. The other thing is I'm curious to understand the community college piece of it. So I don't want you to go too granular, but that was one of the 4, I think, agencies you named related to the, I want to say HMIS, but HDIS. So I'm just curious to understand the thinking behind that. And then the other thing, I keep saying one more thing, 2 more things, only 2 more things. So one of the things that we know is that children that are a part of families that are precariously housed or literally homeless have a higher probability of being homeless themselves, right? And so locally, we're doing some stuff to try to pour into that, stop the generational cycle. But I'm just curious to know, given that it sounds like this is not necessarily just aggregate data, given the way you all are looking at whether people across systems, just wondering if you've thought about in terms of longitudinally understanding if the minors in these households that are touching these different systems show up again. So I can tell you on the ground, we see the kids show up again, right? We see them show up 7 years later, 10 years later as adults in their own type of crisis. And so maybe not right now, but think about the opportunity to understand the impact of being connected to some of these systems or in some of these crises on the children 5, 10, 15 years later is an opportunity to look at use the data that way. Because I don't think we have anything that actually captures it. There's all these anecdotal, like there's these boutique research projects, but I think you all have an opportunity to really look at the impact of being a part of a family that's experiencing homelessness as a child and what that means and how you show up in systems later as an adult, including as a young adult. And so the last thing is also we understand the connection between folks that are just as involved, folks that are experiencing homelessness, but I didn't hear CRCD come up anywhere as even if it's a long-term thing to really to look at the correlations between folks that are attaching to the systems, in particular housing and homeless response related systems and the carceral system, which I think is really important.
I'll try and take those one at a time, but if I forget anything, let me know. So the community colleges administer a housing and homelessness incentive pilot program. And so that's the program that we're working with. So the community colleges have been providing and working with housing partners to provide services to their students who are experiencing homelessness. And so that data is now being captured in HMIS. And that was one of the programs the legislature identified in this bill. So that's kind of the work we're doing with the community colleges. The second on the piece around homeless youth, our longitudinal data right now goes back to 2017. So we don't have the longest picture, but that's certainly something we're interested as we have more and more years of data. And I know the state is doing a lot of work around the cradle to career system and data sharing. And so that I think that started with education data, and homelessness data is a little bit later in their pipeline, but certainly an area we're focused on. And then Cal ICH is implementing, didn't get into it that much today for the sake of time, but the Homeless Youth Act. And so we're actually looking at creating separate measures for youth. So kind of similar to the system performance measures, but youth focused. And then we have another bill we're working on that kind of similar line of work around unaccompanied women and survivors of domestic violence and their children. So we are just working with contractors to do some robust stakeholder engagement this spring and into summer, but we'll be really digging into the data for those populations over the next year or two. And so can come back and report on that work. And then the third piece I think was around people justice involvement. And we don't have a lot of data there. So I think that's another opportunity for data sharing. So we're happy to work on data with any of your departments. And I know we've worked with staff, with many of the folks in this room to provide data. I know we've worked with Department of Aging, with HCD, with CDSS, all in the past few months, but we are always happy to work on data requests or data sharing with our colleagues on the council.
So while HDIS is still relatively new, we have many council member, department, and agency in this room who have decades worth of data. And so the opportunity that we have now is, what do those decades worth of data reflect in current data in HDIS, right? So what last project that I oversaw in Sacramento County was a longitudinal study of child welfare involved cases that then entered into homelessness at a later point in life, and working with researchers to determine what intervention at what point in time may have lent itself to the prevention of that family or that child from entering into homelessness or into other areas of safety net programs. And so truly, this is the first opportunity that we have to do this as a state, but so appreciate the opportunity to lead for communities who are struggling in these areas.
Sydney, thanks for your presentation. I'm Susan DeMorris, the Director of the California Department of Aging, and you have been a great partner on our Master Plan for Aging Key Outcomes and tracking longitudinally the prevalence of older adult homelessness is one of our key measures, and you've been supporting our team, so thank you for that. I had a question about the services going back. It appeared to me, not knowing if there's a drop-down menu, it seemed to be more of a yes or no. Is somebody accessing services? Is there a list of services that follows that we would have a better understanding? And what I'm getting at is in our stakeholder community, there's great interest in shallow rental subsidies. And are we tracking anywhere the extent to which people are accessing that service? And it looks also like it's limited to state-funded services. So what happens to city or federal services that people might be accessing? Are we capturing those too?
So many federal services are in HGIS. So most of HUD's programs and their federal partners have reporting requirements. And then there's the state funded layer. And then at the local level, it really varies jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So some localities have reporting requirements in HMIS and some don't. The types of projects in HMIS, HUD defines all of the data fields in HGIS. So it's not something, Cal ICH has purview over, but there's different types of permanent housing, there's rapid rehousing, there's emergency shelter, and we can follow up with kind of what those breakdowns of services are, but there's nothing specific at the level of like how much a rental subsidy was provided. In our work with other state departments on AB 977, we're creating codes for their programs and guidance. So it's certainly, if a state department is funding a program interested in having HMIS reporting as part of that, then we can work on creating a code or a system for that program. But in terms of the base fields and project types, there's a set defined by HUD.
Great. So the services like navigation or legal services or benefits counseling wouldn't necessarily appear.
They wouldn't be their own category. So they'd be captured by certain other categories. We also have like the project and its name. So in instances where, a department knows, these projects with this name and so forth are this type of service, then we can look for data for those specific projects, but it's not a field in HGIS.
Great. And then we are not a housing provider at the Department of Aging. And I'm wondering, one thing we do track is phone calls. And I wonder if there's a way to capture on the prevention side, the volume. We've seen just huge increase in calls about housing where maybe 5 years ago, rarely did we take calls related to housing. So if that could be helpful in any way, that's something we can contribute, not being a direct service provider.
What I'm hearing, Director DeMorris, is that you're willingly volunteering yourself to participate. Yeah, appreciate it.
Okay, so earlier I raised the issue of disability being part of the equity piece here. So when we talk about this data, two things that I'm curious about. What does this data, we already know that a very, very large percentage of people who are homeless are people with disabilities, somewhere upwards close to 50%. What does this data capture around disability, one, and then two, is there anything in this data collection points that talks about employment? And I'm thinking about employment, not just in terms of obviously helping people get jobs, but people losing their jobs that then contributes to homelessness, right? And obviously for all populations that are losing their jobs, but I'm thinking specifically about the disability population when you see such a large prevalence of homeless being people with disabilities.
Yeah, great question. So HDS has a field on whether someone has a disabling condition, and then there are a couple more detailed fields on whether that's a developmental disability, whether that's a physical disability, on chronic health conditions, but there's not the most detailed data there. So that's kind of the level we can disaggregate at, and then we can see kind of the types of services being accessed by different population groups and so forth. There's very little data on employment. So really HGS focuses on the homelessness services being provided. And so that's where we'd kind of need to link up with other data sets. So not getting into information on the causes of homelessness. It does vary a little bit by program. So certain federal programs have more data fields associated with them, but in terms of fields that are collected for all clients receiving services, all we would really know is whether that person self-identified as having a disability, and a little bit of detail on what that is. And I think Cody's telling me we have time for one more question or comment. I could stand here talking about data all day, but I know there's more on the agenda.
Yeah, thank you. William McGee with the California Department of Education. So thank you for the presentation as well as making this tangible. I know that we had discussed outcomes at previous meetings, and so it'll be very exciting for me to really look at the data connected to outcomes. The question that I have is around, I believe I heard you mention on a few slides back about finding the families and really figuring out the return or whatever the case may be. So my question is there also a spot where you guys are collecting in the data the number of family members and the age of the family members? And the reason I'm asking that is because the support that we give with our homeless technical advisory centers, really trying to make sure that we're identifying children who are experiencing homelessness, and in schools that can pose a difficulty just because of the stigma of being unhoused. And so wondering if there would be, if you guys are planning on capturing that data and then possibly trying to create a nexus to what you're seeing and what we're seeing.
Yeah, demographic data is included for all members of a household who are accessing services together. So that would include age of the children, but also data like race and gender and so forth. We know a lot of data sources that only collect data on the head of household. You're missing a huge portion of the story, especially with children. We also kind of can see how households are changing across different services and over time. So one really challenging data piece for all the data nerds is that households obviously aren't constant. And so we see that, you know, a transition age youth might be accessing services alone, and then a year later, maybe with other family members and so forth. So we can kind of look at what the composition of the household is for each project enrollment.
Sydney, just one last comment from Councilmember Johnson Hall. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I am completely jealous hearing so much about this system, and I have a lot of questions that I'll hold, but I had two questions for you. One is, did you mention that whether this was a proprietary system or?
So each, having an HMIS system is a HUD requirement. So each locality is kind of contracting with a vendor for their systems. And then at the state level, Cal ICH has a proprietary system for like a data warehouse system for combining all of the data.
Okay. And my second question was, at Cal HFA, normally when we do receive inquiries, they are related to community colleges, UC systems, and other schools' activities. And they're inquiring about what we might do in terms of housing students who are unhoused. Is that data that you also would capture with this system, or is that?
We would only capture that if it's a UC, CSU, or community college program that's requiring HMIS reporting. So I think the only one that we can distinctly identify right now is the one community colleges program.
Thank you.
And we can follow up with this after the meeting, but my team is happy to meet with your staff, or if you have other data questions or requests, we can work through that after the meeting.
Before we give it back to Cody to move us on the agenda, I just want to thank Sydney for the amazing work that she's accomplished in her short time at Cal ICH. She is just a little over a year herself. And for the first time in Cal ICH's history, we have a fully staffed data and research team. So kudos to Sydney and all of the work that she's accomplished and all the work that we look forward to collaborating with you all on. So thank you, Sydney. Cody.
All right, thanks. And I wouldn't have cut you off. Don't worry. I would have called on you. So thank you. Yeah, again, thank you to Sydney for being up here and to everyone who presented and asked questions. Really, really appreciate that discussion. And it's actually very related to our next discussion, which is going to be on the action plan. So I'm going to slow down for a second here because there's a lot happening in this agenda item. We heard you that you want to have discussion, that you don't just want us to ask you questions and respond. So we have set this agenda item up in sort of a different way than we've ever done it. So please bear with us if things go a little bit awry, potentially. But our goal for today is really to show you the proposed structure and goals for our new action plan, get your feedback, and then solicit sort of discussion on how it connects to your all's work. So we, as Cal ICH staff, have been taking your input, we've been taking public input, we've been taking all sorts of input on what works about the current plan, what could be improved, and how can we create this new plan in a way that's much more effective and strategic. So that's what we're going to present to you today. We've been having really high-level conversations about the vision for the plan. Now we're getting a little bit more narrow in like what's the structure of the plan that we're proposing, what are some potential goals we're proposing. So I'm going to present all that information to you all. I'm going to try to go quickly. Then we're going to have a discussion as a full group, just like we've been doing. And then, very exciting, for the first time in Cal ICH history, we're going to have small brainstorming groups where we're going to have all of you break out into small groups of like 4 folks, I think. Both co-chairs and both esteemed deputy secretaries have been tapped to facilitate conversations among you. And you may wonder, why am I sitting next to the people I'm sitting next to? Well, it's strategic. You don't have to go anywhere. You're just going to sort of turn to the people next to you, and we're going to come and listen in and take notes. So when we get to that, I will explain what's going to happen, but just to give you a sense of where we're going to be. So after the brainstorming groups, we're going to come back together and we're going to share out to make sure all the discussions are public and that we can each learn from what the discussions were. So yeah, this is sort of a new way to solicit engagement. So thank you for the patience in advance. But first, I will talk a little bit. So on the next slide, this is just a reminder of what our current action plan looks like, right? So our current plan, as we've talked about many, many times, is sort of the most comprehensive collection of state activities to address homelessness. It covers activities from fiscal year 2021 through this fiscal year, so this June. And the vision is to make homelessness rare, brief, and one time with increased leadership from the state, purposeful action-oriented coordination and alignment, and stronger collaborative partnerships. As we all know, we're in the process to create the new plan to cover fiscal year 24, 25, and beyond. And really just as a reminder, right, the audience for this plan is both internal, right? It's both as an organizing document for us as a council, but with input from the experts that we have, right? Our advisory committee, our leaves, the local communities, our working groups. But it's also, we also have a desire, and we've heard a desire from this group to make the plan as useful as possible for our local communities, right? To really show what we're doing for local communities on the ground to push this work forward. So on the next slide, I'm going to show you the timeline of what we're doing here. The timeline has been a little bit revised due to the rescheduling of this meeting, just to make sure we have enough time to really work with you all in a deep way to identify the most strategic and new sort of actions that you all are going to pursue and put in this plan. That's something that we heard loud and clear from your all's feedback before, to make sure that we're really choosing what we're doing here to push towards our goals. So the input to date, I just want to share with you a little bit about the input we've gotten so far. We've talked about some form of the action plan in some form or another at multiple advisory committee and LEAB meetings. We've had 2 tribal engagements so far with communities across the state. We have another one, as Megan said, on Friday. We've presented at the National Alliance and Homelessness Conference and a conference of higher education organizations. And then we have lots of planned input too. We're working with CDE to get their local partners. We're working with DSS to talk to their local partners, DPH, youth homelessness providers, cities, counties, and COCs. There's a whole list here that I'm not going to read off to you. But all that is to say, we want to be in your business. So as you're listening to this, please think of venues that might be appropriate to really solicit input from your all's partner groups, right? About the work that you can be doing and like prioritizing for the plan. So that's sort of where we're going. And we will present summaries of that public input at one of the future council meetings, just to give you a sense of what we're hearing. So on the next slide, I'm going to start by talking about sort of the proposed vision and structure for the plan. So this has changed in response to your all's comments, right? You may remember our 5 action areas of the current plan. We think that those are still very relevant as sort of like, what does our ideal system look like, right? We want to prevent homelessness. We want effective interim housing. We want effective permanent housing, et cetera. But one thing we heard was that you all wanted to be able to see yourselves more in the plan, like the work that you're doing, and also be able to identify areas of overlap of your work. So that's sort of how we've structured the plan this go around. Okay, so on the next slide, I'm going to apologize because I created a smart art graphic and it's really hard to read from that far away. And the colors aren't great, but I will go over all this information in the next slides as well. So this is really just like a high level overview of the plan's framework, right? So we have a vision, right? We want to support state, tribal, and local systems to prevent and end homelessness. And we want to make sure we're always focused on advancing progress towards equity. The way we've structured the plan, as you'll see, is in council tools in your toolbox. And so this is really like, what role and capacity do state departments and agencies actually have to be deployed in support of that vision? And what are equity frameworks and principles that can help us guide our implementation of those tools? Within each of the tools are actions, which is sort of like our activities that we have now, like literally what are we doing? What projects do we have going on? So both actions at the state level and actions to support local and tribal communities. And then sort of encompassing the whole plan, there's performance measurement, as you might imagine, with 4 to 5 higher level goals, key indicators that aren't necessarily goals, but are things that we want to measure, right? I think a lot of what we heard in the data discussion was like, we might not exactly be able to measure these things as like goals, but we want to make sure that we're looking at this information to understand the nuances of homelessness. And then implementation measures. So for each action that we are all taking, how are we following up on that? How do we understand our progress? So I'm going to, on the next slide, talk a little bit about our draft vision. And this is something that we are working on, of course. So any thoughts on this, we're going to solicit input from you all later on the discussion, or sorry, on the vision. But it says here, right, through implementation of the plan, the council and its member agencies and departments will help ensure that homelessness is a rare, brief, and one-time experience in California, and that communities throughout the state can prevent people from becoming homeless and reduce the number of people who are currently experiencing homelessness, address the health, safety, and services needs of people who are experiencing or at risk of homelessness, provide people with expanded interim and permanent housing options and services that will support people to succeed and thrive, and end racial inequities and other disparities in who experiences homelessness, the opportunities they are provided, and the outcomes they are supported to achieve. So this is like, what is our end state, right? Like, what is it that we're working towards with this plan? That will be repeated when we have the discussion, so don't memorize it. On the next slide, we have the tools. So, right, so from the vision, what can the state actually do to move towards that vision? And we love the number 5, apparently. We identified 5 sort of tools that we all have access to in one way or another as council member departments and agencies in our work preventing and ending homelessness, right? So the first is increasing the supply of housing and services, right? So we want to make available a variety of housing and services options that people need to thrive, to serve the diversity of people who experience homelessness. We have coordinating and streamlining state programs. So, right, like this is back to the conversation about aligning funding elements such as definitions, reporting requirements, outcome expectations, et cetera. We want to engage partners in communities, so actively working with local communities, tribal partners, people with lived experiences of homelessness, and other groups to gather feedback and guidance on this work. We want to use data strategically, so perfect timing for this last presentation, right? Expanding and improving our data analysis and data sharing efforts at the state level. And then advancing best practices and quality, right? Providing those tools, that guidance, the training, the technical assistance that we all do, and making sure that that is coordinated and effective. So this is sort of how we conceived of, you know, everyone at this, hopefully everyone sitting at this table can see themselves in some of these tools, and spoiler alert, that's something that we're going to be doing later. But we really wanted to make sure that you all could say, yeah, I actually do fit in. It's very clear how I fit into the work of preventing and ending homelessness. And I fit into many, if not, you know, all of these tools. We just thought it was really important to make sure that while these are not mutually exclusive groups of things going on, right, that we are sort of calling out, like, what is the state's role in preventing and ending homelessness? So those are our tools. Is there a comment? Yeah.
Hi, Lindsay Sin, Secretary of the California Department of Veterans Affairs. One thing that strikes me here is the mention of the word "the state." And I would like to point out that because we are a body that represents more than just the state, we also represent an advisory committee. There are people with lived experiences. There are individuals who represent kind of the local level, community level efforts of work. It would be good to also consider adding an advocacy and recommendations component to what the vision looks like for this, as well as the tools that are in the state's toolbox, because this is more than just us coordinating improved work with community partners or coordinating improved work with each other in the provision of dollars that we have to put out to help end homelessness. It's also about setting policy and making good policy recommendations about changes that we see need to happen in California. So I'd really like to recommend a space in this toolbox as well as within the vision that focuses on how we help set policy, because I can't think of another body in the state that would be doing that rather than us.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate that comment. Okay, I'm gonna keep going because there's more information here. I'm sorry. So on the next slide, you will see sort of within each of these tools, right? I sort of said this before, but there's the actions that we're actually gonna be doing. This is like our projects that we're working on. So both state level actions and actions to support local communities. We're identifying currently equity focused frameworks and principles to guide our implementation, and then also implementation measures for each action. And on the next slide, you'll see a very brief list that I'm not going to get into for a super long time of potential equity frameworks. One of the things we're working on with our racial equity working group and plan to increase the work on that in that group is really like, we know that equity is not one thing, right? Equity as it relates to data is different from equity as it relates to coordinating services, is different than equity as it relates to best practices and engaging partners. So we're really looking for different frameworks to help guide the implementation and like understand the progress in reducing inequities in our system. More to come on that at a future meeting. Please don't quiz me about that quite yet, but we'll get there. So then we're going to move on to the goals. So that was sort of the structure of the plan. And now we're going to talk about goals briefly. So another thing we heard loud and clear from this group was that we wanted the plan to be strategic. We wanted it to lead us, you know, we wanted it to help us guide our work in some way. And so we've put together a more robust set of goals to include in the plan that I'm going to go over briefly. So overall performance measurement, I sort of talked about that earlier. We're going to have 4 to 5 high-level goals that the plan will strive to achieve. We'll talk about that more. That's sort of the focus for right now. Then there will be key indicators, which are things that are not necessarily the goals we want to hold ourselves to, but information that we want to make sure we're collecting and reporting out on regularly. And then there's individual implementation measures to understand the success of each action. Ideally, those are tied to our goals, right? Like, so we can really see the connection of our work to our goals. So on the next slide, you will see in big letters, our current plan doesn't actually identify any explicit goals. It identifies key performance measures that are aligned with the California system performance measures that Sydney talked about earlier. And the new plan is basically uses those system performance measures to create a new set of directional goals. On the next slide, you're going to see our current key performance measures. Again, I'm not going to read through those, and also Sydney already mentioned them. But really, this is just to show, like, this is the data we're currently sort of collecting and reporting out on in the plan. And on the next slide, you'll see the criteria that we use to decide, okay, how do we take all of that information and turn it into goals for this plan? So we wanted to make sure a few things if we were going to have goals, right? We wanted to make sure that the goals actually represented the core outcomes that homelessness response system has to accomplish in order to prevent it in homelessness. We wanted to make sure that a goal helped focus the council on actions that will drive progress. We wanted the goals to help the public understand the focus of our efforts. And then we wanted things, this may sound obvious, but we wanted things we could actually measure consistently over time. And so, as you might imagine, that narrows down the pool of things pretty significantly. So on the next slide, you will see our draft sort of 4 goals that we have so far. And I will read through them, but we'll have a chance to talk through these. There's a discussion question on this coming up. But we're saying, right, by implementing the actions in the plan, the state will be striving to achieve the following goals: increase the number of people exiting homelessness into permanent housing, reduce the length of reduce the length of time people remain homeless, reduce the number of people returning to homelessness after exiting to permanent housing, and increasing successful placements from street outreach. So these goals you can sort of see mirror our rare, brief, and one-time structure that we have for the plan in our vision. And we also know that these 4 do not encompass every single thing that we would want to measure as part of the plan. On the next slide, there is a list of things that we're also exploring how to measure, how to include as a potential goal, right? So we know there's no health-related goal or indicator in that list. We know there's no prevention-related goal or indicator in that list. And we know there's no indicator related to reducing inequities. Those are things we are trying actively to understand, like, how do we use the data available or data that you all have available, right, to really understand these things, and we're working on that. It may be that we measure something as an indicator, but these don't rise to the level of a goal specifically, but more to discuss. So I am done talking. Now you get to talk. So in the full group discussion, we have sort of 2 sets of questions. The first is around our vision, and the second is around the goal. Is around the goals. So we're going to start with the vision and sort of focus on that. We'll have, I think, about 10 minutes or so, if I didn't talk for too long, to go through that. And then we'll go to the next set of full group discussion questions. And then I will tell us how we're going to do these small brainstorming groups. So let's start with the next slide. Great. So full group discussion. The vision is up there. It's probably a little hard to read. But what questions or initial reactions do you have about this draft vision for the plan?
And so as you all are pondering that very important question, please feel free, this is a very long meeting. This includes for council members as well as general public. Please feel free to get up, stretch as you get the blood flowing on this question. Thank you. And Cody can wait very long time in very uncomfortable silence. So please do take your time.
I have something. I'm going back to what Secretary Moss and Dr. Gali talked about earlier with engagement with the community. And, you know, in the draft statement, I don't see anything in here about talking about engaging with the community. It's all about this council and the departments and the state, but we can't do that alone. And it goes also to what Secretary Sin said about engaging with the community. I think we just need to have a little something in there about engagement with our community partners and counties so that, you know, because it's a collective problem. It's just not our problem.
Thank you.
I think I'll ask a quick question. So looking at that first paragraph, implementation of this plan, the word ensure, what's the thinking around that? To help ensure homelessness is rare. What's the thinking about the word ensure?
I will offer that it's written in statute that the work of the council shall ensure. And so much of what you see there has been taken from statute as it relates to Cal ICH's obligations.
So then, thank you for that. So then wondering how Cal ICH can then ensure, because even though it's in statute, does it need to be in the vision? I guess that would be the question. And then for me, if we're saying ensure, that's a very strong word, like it's going to happen. So just putting it out there for thought, I might be off on my own tangent, but just putting it out there for thought as a discussion.
No, that's fair. Thank you. If you have any ideas for other words, also feel free to send them our way. Yeah. Yeah, please.
Yeah, so there's so many ways to approach this, but for me, when I think of a vision, I think of a sort of a desired future state that's going to inspire and motivate people, that's easy to remember, that almost becomes a tagline for what we stand for. And then this one here, I actually see these as goals. So you take the first one, prevent people from becoming homeless, and then say as measured by, and then you have what you put previously, which are the metrics. So these are goals, the other ones are metrics. And so that's the way I read these.
Yeah, that's helpful. And I think there's something there to like making clear what our desired future state actually is in here. So I think that makes a lot of sense.
Oh, go ahead, please.
I know vision statements are essentially, ultimately, this is the North Star, right? And so with respect to, and then we're breaking it down further with goals and activities or strategies to do that. And so I think looking at bullet number 2, so the first thing I thought about when I saw this, I think again, since it's supposed to be meant to be very high level, overarching, this is what we hope, this is the type of state we hope to create for the most vulnerable people, essentially, is what I think of a vision as. When I first saw this, listening to the discussion in the previous agenda item about the data, et cetera, and understanding even beyond just the disparity pieces related to access, service provision, outcomes, there's still a need to strengthen and provide more comprehensive support for the things that you have in number 2. And so just wanting to uplift, and I'll come up with, Cody, I'll give you some ideas if I have them. So I have some word, but I think that addressing, I think that given all the information we're about to have with the data projects, I think that we need stronger language. Again, given this is the vision, so I don't know if it's improve and strengthen or comprehensively addressed, but I think that language needs to be stronger given the gaps that we're aware of. Prop 1 will address a lot of those things, but I think that language needs to be stronger given this is the type of California we want to create for folks. I think that we need to be thinking in those terms related to the vision specifically.
Thanks. Yeah, Councilmember Johnson.
Yeah, two things building on that. To the question of reaction, when I look at the vision statement without the bullets, it's not bold enough for me. So I do think it is about ending homelessness for those who are experiencing it and preventing it from never occurring. I feel like we need to be much bolder on the overall state. Like, it's unacceptable. Shouldn't happen. And I think the second comment I want to make is also related to the second bullet, which we can determine as a goal or not. And that is really, really leaning hard into the integration. We do have services, we have housing, and we have different components, but it is about integrating those intentionally from the beginning that I think is something that we want to really push forward on in terms of our goals. So those are 2 comments.
Great, thank you.
I just wanted to chime in quickly, building off of what's already been said. I know it's unpopular, But I actually think we need targeted outcomes that what we're talking about, reduced percentages of those experiencing the crisis of homelessness in our communities. You leveraging what Secretary Sin talked about around our policy tools and maybe we set timelines that give us time to reduce unsheltered homelessness by X% over the next 5 years or 8 years or 10 years. But if we're not actually, these could be happening and we still not see the kind of impact that we expect to see in communities. We could actually check off all these boxes, but unless we're talking about scale, unless we're talking about population level outcomes, I think we're missing something here. And so I'm just trying to figure out how we don't box ourselves in, but that we all take some accountability, both the state, this council, local, everybody being like, no, it's unacceptable. Therefore, we're going to all bring our assets to the table and get to a 50% reduction by 2030, full stop, as an example.
I'd also just like to offer that this is going to be the first ever multi-year action plan. So I think setting very specific metrics is more than appropriate now that it will be longer than a year-long action plan. But would love, I know it's not the particular question at hand, but would love to hear from council members who do have programs that have metrics attached to them. What numbers are we talking about? If this is a 3-year action plan at the end of 3 years, what would this council like to see?
Yeah, and that's the perfect segue to our next slide, which is on the goals. So yeah, not to interrupt, I just want us to move to this slide so y'all could see them and have them in front of you. But yeah, I want to lift up your question, Secretary Moss, to the rest of the group as well.
I think one thing that's missing in this also is that we provide Californians with access to services, not just provide them, but so they know where to get these services. Oftentimes in my programs, I'm the assistant director over grants management for Cal OES. I have over 800 80 programs that fund over 800 subrecipients, mostly community-based organizations for victims of crime. And oftentimes you find that they don't have the ability to have access to those or know where to receive those services. So I think one of the biggest, not just provide, but the word access to services is missing in this.
Yeah, thank you.
I would advocate that in the vision, the first number one was to prevent people from entering homelessness. And then we don't have all of our goals focus on people who are already homeless. So I would say we really need to include a prevention goal.
So I'd like to, as I'm looking at this slide, kind of continue this thought process that some people have already elevated with a really bold vision, which is kind of critical. But also in your draft goals here, these really read like metrics rather than goals. So I think we've been excited and focused on HDIS. And I'm excited to get there too. I can't wait to dig in a little bit about what we can do with HDIS. But these definitely read like metrics rather than goals. I really think your goals are the slide that you put in the state's toolbox. I mean, those are a little broader. They allow for objectives and metrics, or however you want to word it, even key performance indicators that focus on kind of the broader topics that you can dig into. And they certainly lay it out in very fun colors, and fun colors in a strategic plan or a vision or a plan are huge. So I mean, maybe we start there.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think you're making Sydney's heart sing, because I'm pretty sure she told me the exact same thing when I showed her these slides. So I appreciate the double click on that. Yeah, Councilmember Lewis, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, thank you. Just to add to the course, if you, I'm flipping back and forth. So the toolbox are the goals, right? And we have the draft, what you have on the screen now being the objectives. I really think actually the measures of those objectives can be built out, right? And so to Secretary Moss's point, I think that one, we need to add some actual numbers to the goals, and I don't know that we can accomplish that today. I think that obviously there's lots of nuances related to that, but the measures of how we reach these goals, part of it, we could look at the data system. Well, now the other data, the HGIS is only going to be captured. I think I understood this state-funded programs. There's still other measures that you all have to understand across the state of California beyond just state-funded, specifically state-funded programs, whether or not some of these things are happening, right? So if we're seeing a decrease in, so I think that there's another step after this. So even after you assign the numbers, there's another step in terms of what are you actually going to be looking at in HGIS and otherwise to determine whether or not these things have been accomplished, which I know that's very granular, and maybe the intention is to have the advisory committee do that piece of it, but I think that this body should weigh in to some extent on the next step and the measures and indicators, measures, choose a word.
Yeah.
But I think you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, just want to, I know that I talk up here a lot out to you all, and just want to like remind you all, like this is your plan, right? Like this is the council's plan. And so if you are, we try to take what you all say and propose things to you that meet those needs, but you're welcome to say like, these are measures, your vision is this, right? Like we want these goals and they need to be this specific. Like that is all really welcome feedback. And as you said, Councilmember Lewis, like we might not be able to come to numeric goals here today in this meeting, but like we can go out and think about what that would look like to incorporate that if that is what the council is asking for. So open to any and all feedback in that realm.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I appreciate this discussion. I do want to echo about the goals and making sure they are measurable, turning them into SMART goals. I believe I heard that this will be the 3-year action plan. So once we do figure out how to measure what the goals will be, make sure they're time bound, then making sure that we get updates at them yearly. And I think yearly is good, but we can also look at maybe every half a year or whatnot. But when we're looking at the plan, just coming back to see, are we on track with what we said we wanted to do it in 3 years? So I definitely do feel we have to figure out the measurement, the realistic goals and what we're looking at. And I think the other thing would be is looking at maybe some baseline data to really help shape this discussion.
Okay, so as I am reading the draft goal, something just came to my mind, and I'm sorry maybe to change or take us back several steps, but you mentioned baseline, and then I hear this Secretary Moss talk about we have to like measure with percentages and kind of numeric targets, how we're going to achieve, how we're going to see our own progress of our collective efforts. Have we at this council ever agree as a body what the numeric problem is? Is it 182,000 people that is our baseline? Is that the number of people that we are, has this council agree on that? And now, of course, this is a very complex issue because we only have in the state of California 24 homes for every 100 extremely low income people. So obviously the potential for people on any given day to become homeless is there. So but at some point this council has to like set that base, that what the problem that we are trying to solve is. And so I would just challenge my colleagues in this council to ask, is the problem with the goals, with the metrics that we're trying to achieve, first and foremost, 182,000 people in the state of California? Is that an agreement in the council? Maybe we haven't agreed on that.
I really appreciate that, Director Velasquez. I will say there's a wide variety of definitions. I think that each one of the council member departments and agencies ascribe to, utilize on a day-to-day basis. And so when we say baseline, not just baseline data, but baseline and what this council sees as being the appropriate terminology, the appropriate definitions. For example, encampments is something, I think there's at least 4 departments in this room that define an encampment different than one another. And that becomes problematic when we attempt to set percentage goals for reductions in certain areas. And so if directed by the council, myself and my staff would be very happy to put together a draft resolution for council consideration to come to agreement in those very necessary areas.
Not necessarily on that point, but one other thing, just in terms of the conversation that I want to make sure we don't lose, because I can, well, as a proud California native, with no plans to ever leave, I think the way we do things is really critical, and you can end homelessness by various strategies. And I think some of us have watched states do some things that maybe we don't agree with in terms of how they've taken that approach. So I do think, to the points around engaging community and those with lived experience, to some of the conversation on the how, which we haven't gotten to, and I appreciate, I think we might need some guiding principles that speak to the approaches that we take in California to address in the strategies that we take. I just think that the guiding principles will help kind of center. It's also kind of vision oriented to the conversation on the how. So just another addition if the staff would be so inclined to support us with that.
Great, thank you. And I'm going to keep myself to the time because I kept Sydney, so I can't have a double standard. But Councilmember Lewis, do you have another comment before we move to the small group discussion?
Yeah, just thinking about what Megan said, I think that, and I can't recall, forgive me, somebody talked about integration a few minutes ago, but listening to her, I honestly think that, because again, one of the most exciting things when I was invited to be a part or appointed to be a part of this body is to really look at breaking down the silos and understanding redundancy. And I understand there's lots of federal money and regulations flowing into state departments that govern how you do your work in part, but I feel like we need to have a goal related to alignment. And you all can pick a prettier word if you want, but I think that the point that was just raised, so it's 2 things. One, to come to an agreement on what our tangible and measurable, I know folks were waiting for me to say that, goals that we come up with now, right? So we can be working towards those in 3 years. But I think the other reality is there's still with all of the great collaboration you all are doing on your own, there's still a significant opportunity for greater, thoughtful, strategic alignment across multiple departments, across multiple facets of the work. And I feel like, I don't know that that's been formally stated, but I think it needs to be a goal. And so just, I don't know how others feel about that, and it's not a discount of the things you're already doing working together, but I think that there's an opportunity to formally call it out and really take some thoughtful and intentional action to get us to a place as a state where departments are so aligned and thoughtful, even with respect to the constraints related to federal money and regular or other regulatory barriers. I think there's an opportunity for the state to be in a much better place. And so I think it should be named here as an actual goal.
Great, thank you. All right. Oh, yeah, Director Xavier.
Okay, one quick comment. What Tomas said about that desired state is really resonating with me. And I wonder how we set a baseline if we're not clear about what the end goal, what the end line is, right? How do we get a baseline of something if we're not clear that when we're there, we've done it? So I think it's worth spending a little more time thinking about the end result, the desired state, when we know this is all done.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. And I know it doesn't look like I'm taking notes because I'm not, but we do have a lot of people taking notes on this discussion. So you're giving us a lot of fodder for our work. So thank you. And this was just a warm up. So let me explain what's going to happen next, because it's going to be great. So we're going to break out into smaller brainstorming groups by seating. So no need to move. So we have one facilitator and one Cal-ICH staff who will join you in a minute, and I'll tell people where they're going to go. We have 2 sets of questions for you all to answer in small groups. We'll have about 10-ish minutes for each one. After the first 10 minutes, we'll prompt you and say, move along to the next set. We'll change the slides so you can see the questions. Facilitators, please be prepared to share out what you heard in your groups to the larger public when we come back together, because we're going to come back together and do a share out so that everyone in the public can hear what was discussed and that we all can hear what we discussed. For members of the public joining in person, you are welcome to listen into the groups. So it's just for council members to discuss, but you're welcome to listen in, sort of float around and listen. For members of the public joining us online, unfortunately, the technology is such that you will likely not be able to hear the group discussions happening as they occur. So feel free to take this as sort of an intermission for yourselves, but you will be able to hear the share out after. So please feel free to come back and you'll hear the report out after the brainstorming is over. We will take public comment after this agenda item. So you're welcome to comment on the things you've heard in the share out. Any questions before I assign people where they're gonna go? All right. So starting over here, in these four council members, starting with Councilmember Johnson, we have, oh gosh, I should have organized this by where you are sitting in the room. We have Dakshika and our staff Shahara, so you all can like carefully pull your chairs over there to you four. And then starting with Councilmember Damaris all the way to Secretary Moss, we have Megan and Secretary Moss will be facilitating. And oh, we had these rolly chairs, but take your own chairs if you'd like. And then Dr. Galley, I will be with you. And then Megan, you're gonna, oh no, sorry, Giselle will be with Corinne. Yes, you already figured it out. You don't need me, look at that. And then we'll put up the next slide and I'll read out the first set of questions. So the next slide is 49. We have them there too, but we will get those up on the screen. Perfect. So the first set of questions are on the vision, right? What part of the draft vision do you see your department most connected to? And are there changes to the draft vision that would better help you see your department's roles reflected in the plan? I'll do my best.
Just want to check this. Yes, I think. Great job. I did do what you guys did everything, and I just said, yes, yeah. I know I'm not. Absolutely. Right, but we can at least quite Oh, he was. You didn't know. Was it on the radar?
Yeah, like providing.
Okay, everyone, it's time to start wrapping up the small groups.
So Claire has a very polite inside voice. I unfortunately do not. We do have to allow for public comment, so would ask that you all just give us a minute to reorient our public participants to these great conversations. Thank you.
All right, so we're gonna come back together now. Everyone finish up your thoughts, take your seats. We're gonna do a big share out. Then we're gonna have opportunity for public comment, both in person and online. It sounded like there was a lot of conversation happening, which is great. Be careful of those wires. Careful. You got it. All right. And don't worry about the chairs. We'll put them back. All right. Thank you all. Appreciate it. Sounds like there was good discussion happening. So now we want to hear what everyone said. We were obviously taking notes. We will include those in our meeting summary. But also just want to give each group a chance to share out on the questions. So if we go to the next slide, we will see the share out. So we're going to start with question set number 1. So that was about the vision. Which part of this draft vision do you see your department as most connected to? And are there changes to the draft vision that would better help you see your department's roles reflected? So I am happy to call on folks, but if people want to raise their hands to start as the representatives for their groups, please feel free to do so. Dakshika, I'm calling on you. She raised her hand.
I did raise my hand. So we actually flipped the questions and started with tools first, but to try to be obedient, I'll start with vision, even though we took that second. As you heard in the kind of big discussion, I think our group as well, which was, we had Tomas Aragon, Veronica Lewis, Stephanie Clendenin, and Kim Johnson. So very diverse group of directors and community member there. I think people were still struggling with the vision and wanting it to be bolder and something snappy that people could memorize and really say and be inspired by. So this is not perfect, but Kim Johnson said, why not just say end homelessness for everyone and prevent homelessness? I know this is not, some kind of media person will have to make this sound nicer, but basically say we're going to end and prevent homelessness for all Californians. And if people do become homeless, I think Veronica said we still want to have the rare, brief, and one time, because being realistic that there will be people experiencing homelessness, but our systems are going to respond accordingly, right? So that's the vision. And then Tomas actually did this visual, which I will submit as evidence to the court, where the vision is the why, the goals are the what, and then the objectives and the key results are the how. So if we come up with a vision, which I kind of mentioned, the goal would be, and the key results and the objectives, we will end homelessness as measured by X metric. We will prevent homelessness as measured by X metric. And then we also liked what Secretary Moss said around thinking about a timeline and where we want to get to and figuring out how we kind of measure that. So I know that's a lot of kind of broad statements, but just wanted to share that's what we talked about around vision, goal, but also talking about objectives and key results. Team, is there anything I missed that you want to add here? No? Okay.
Great, thank you. That's great. And we'll go to the vision next. Oh, sorry, we'll go to the goals next.
Okay. Should
So-
I do that or you want to go around and do everybody? Just keep going? Okay.
Keep going, sure.
So on the tools, here again, there was some suggestion that these, rather than tools, should be goals or approaches. One thing was around the coordinating and streamlining state programs. There was a belief that there should be a word integration in there. And then when we talked about measuring results, there was also discussion around pulling that out and really being the Interagency Council on Homelessness. Integration should be kind of an approach for everything we do, whether it's increasing the supply of housing and services, whether it's engaging partners, whether it's using data, whether it's advancing best practices and quality, and having this coordination, integration piece as an approach that underlies everything. So that's one thing to offer. The second thing that I think Kim Johnson brought up is we talk about the supply of housing, but nowhere are we talking about affordable housing. So we felt it was important to really call that out. And we didn't really have time to get into this, but I could see this was going there around really without enough housing. And Gustavo, you kind of brought this up. Without solving kind of the housing issue, you're not really going to be able to kind of solve all these kinds of objectives that we're trying to achieve. But then on the actual thing you asked me to do, which is around the tools and what are people doing right now and other new ways. So there was a lot of things, CDSS, for example, with their community expansion program, they have really looked at ways to create new supportive housing, new assisted living for older adults and people with disabilities, as well as make sure that existing facilities don't go away and that you maintain and sustain existing assisted living facilities for older adults and people with disabilities that are CDSS mentioned that, and this is around increasing the supply of housing and services. Similarly, state hospitals are doing a lot of work when people are in state hospitals with severe mental health issues. They're looking at ways to really create more housing within their stock so that you are not using other kinds of resources in the community to build housing for people in the state hospitals portfolio. I will bring up on this point that we felt there needed to be more on prevention, which wasn't called out around in people exiting institutions and how we can really do more around goal setting there on the prevention of homelessness side. Also with CDSS, when it comes to CalWorks, this was a question from Veronica around how if people who are in the safety net systems have potential eligibility for a variety of programs, but CDSS does that through CalWorks, really making sure that, and these are new things that they're trying, Kim can probably give you more details to make sure when there's intake happening, intake is occurring for CalWorks, for child support, and for all the different programs within the CDSS portfolio. And hopefully soon at the county level too, these kinds of things will be happening. And then on BCHIP and CCE, similarly CDSS and DHCS, we're talking to each other again to make sure that there were shared opportunities to really connect the dots across both departments to make sure that if there were clients that eligible for both, that they were kind of highlighting and bringing forward those opportunities for clients to take advantage of both programs. And then two more things. CalWorks, the HSP program, they're building more flexibility so that instead of just rental assistance, you can also potentially now use those tools to build new affordable housing. And then finally on HTAP, also in the CDSS portfolio, looking at ways to really connect the dots between the social security supports and the housing assistance for adults with disabilities.
Great.
Anything else that anybody wants to add? No.
Wonderful. Thank you for that thorough report out. I really appreciate it. Corinne, do you want to go next? Great.
Yes, I am happy to just go down the line. I want to say that our group members said that they really liked the activity. So I wanted you to know that, Cody. You got a thumbs up on the small group discussion. So our group included Marina, Gina, Diana, and William. And on the first question, around the vision, the group really did come from their perspective from each of their respective agencies and departments. And we talked a bit about, Tomas, your idea of the future state and how important that is in having a vision statement. And we got a couple of requests for something that was shorter, came up a couple of times, need a shorter, maybe a little catchier vision statement came out. So a couple of themes that were pretty clear was a question of integration. And this came from the TCAC perspective, thinking about where are you siting housing and how do you create integrated communities? And that came up also from the CDCR perspective, because when we think about how, especially when it comes to placing hard to place clients who we're trying to place who are coming out of our state prison system, especially those with complex care needs, how hard that can be. We talked also a lot about the importance of access showing up, the question of access. Again, a need for prevention showed up as well. And access came from our Cal OES perspective, especially in the space of providing lots of programming for domestic violence and intimate partner violence, and how important awareness and access are, and real meaningful warm handoffs and connection to services is a real lesson learned from that system of care. Okay, I'm going to move on unless anybody from my group wants to stop me on the vision. So when it came to the second set of questions, navigation came up in a pretty major way in thinking again about how we connect people to services. And in the TCAC example from Marina, the question was really, a lot of the focus of TCAC's role is around funding developer partners, but how can there be a greater focus on the end user? And especially on how that end user may be able to navigate the incredible portfolio of housing that's been created since 1986, and how we can have a more user-friendly approach to helping people to navigate, and also just to know how to navigate and what to expect from the affordable housing portfolio in California that we've been supporting at the state level, how to know the rules, how to navigate it effectively. From the education side, part of where folks saw their role was around, and William in particular, was around partnership and coordination, how to build partnership and coordination, and some of the work that they've been doing to identify some best practices in parts of the state. And one example of what that has looked like in the San Francisco School District, where they've taken some, in some cases, even made space in the school campus to provide shelter for families, and other examples of sort of going above and beyond, and how they can create the partnership and coordination to facilitate that kind of work. Gina shared a little bit about about navigation and the importance of having clear access and guidelines. So how we could streamline some of that, how we can lift up what's happening in 211 or other models where we can create an easy way for people to know where to go to get the services that they need. Also talked a lot about the role of our departments in doing more proactive outreach. One example being to tribes when we make grant funding available. Are we actually picking up the phone and making phone calls, or what are the ways that we're going the extra mile to support access? And then again, just to we'll put another like +1 on making sure that the goals are SMART goals with numeric outcomes and using our data, as we've talked about today, to drive those outcomes. And another +1 for spending time to come up with some unified definitions. Our group loves blueprints, they love toolkits, they love that kind of structure. So those are all welcome. And then the last thing I'll end on is just I thought a really insightful comments from the group around how important it is that this work tells the story of what we're trying to accomplish and helps to do that in a very sort of visceral, visual way. And that is really ultimately connected to building trust in government and how important that is for us to be able to accomplish this work. So yeah, great group. Thank you, group. Anything you want to add?
Wonderful. Thank you for that. Secretary Moss or someone from your group, would you like to share out?
Sure. I'll start with the first question set. And our group was Susan, Glenn, Joe, and Elisa, and myself. And this amazing Anna. Anna was also a part of our group. So it's also +1 for love the breakout groups. Great discussion and a chance for folks to really get their thoughts out there. So racial inequities and disparities were brought up by Caltrans in particular, and really thinking about partnerships and how to expand the partnerships and collaborations within community, given that they don't actually provide services or programs. So I thought that that was really important. There was a resounding commitment to prevention from everyone, that we needed to be thinking more upstream. Department of Rehab, everyone mentioned prevention as we were talking. Also thinking about prevention, not just on preventing folks from a services perspective, but how do we also look at incomes and employment, and where are the workforce interventions that we should be thinking about also in the solution set, which I thought was really helpful. We also talked a bit about sort of this idea, and this sort of spanned both questions really. Integration was also a topic here that folks really thought was missing. And I guess, Councilmember Xavier, I wonder if you could actually speak to this, but integration, not just meaning putting everything into one place, but integration really thinking about how people actually interact with our systems, and how might we integrate our work to have a more responsive set of resources, program outcomes, et cetera, for the people. So really a human-centered design, so that when we set up criteria for how our programs are operating, it's actually not based on funding requirements, but it's based on what the humans actually need. So I didn't know, did I get it? Okay, good. All right. And that, I'm like, ding, ding, let's do that. Right? Like, wouldn't it just be better if we did that? Because then you break down the silos of, oh, I'm a, person with disabilities, or I'm a person who has an extremely low income on the brink of homelessness, or I am unhoused. If we are looking at how people actually live their lives, I think we can have a much more responsive set of programs. And then, did I hit it all, y'all? There was a little bit of talk about some of the ancillary supports like housing navigation, all of the things. We talk a lot about services and housing, but there's actually a lot of elements to what people need to thrive. And so I think we talked a bit about what would that actually look like to make sure that Medi-Cal and Cal-AIM and those resources were providing holistic supports for families, and how do we not wait for people to fail in our systems to then try to help them recover, as opposed to stabilizing households through our prevention efforts and getting them on the road to thriving. Did I miss anything? Anything else? Okay.
You covered it beautifully, Secretary. I would just add personally something that really will, I think, stay with me for quite some time is a comment that Director Xavier made that for the majority of us in this room, in order for persons to access these services that we are all responsible for holding, they have to fail to benefit from us. And that really stuck with me as we talk more and more about the need for prevention, for meaningful prevention engagement. By design, welfare entitlement benefit-based programs require persons to be in a dire state. And so what can we do as a council to have a different approach, I will say. So thank you.
Great, thank you for that. And I'm going to pass it over to Councilmember Sin, who is reporting out on behalf of Dr. Galley, who had to leave, but was an active participant in our group.
Yes, so active that he volunteered me to do this. Thanks, Dr. Galley. So since he's not here, if there's anything, action items that need to be assigned out, we're gonna give it to him. Well, I appreciate all the comments, hearing from the other groups, because I think a lot of the same threads were found in the discussion that we had. The first is the group consisted of Dr. Galley, Director Velasquez, Director Johnson Hall, myself at Calvet, and then our esteemed member of the public from Solano County. So I'm sorry, Sonoma. My apologies. See, I'm already failing at this. So we first started with the realization that we all have a major role to play in our respective agencies and departments regarding building housing and providing housing. So of course, this was an objective that, a goal that really stuck with us. We are directly connected to that vision, but we would like to see it be bolder and bigger. The question we're asking though is what happens after we end homelessness? If we're going to submit the vision as we're going to end homelessness, there needs to be more than that. There needs to be infrastructure. There needs to be, I'll dare say it, a reason for this council to not exist. We need to be thinking about kind of talking ourselves out of jobs here because people have everything that they need. So we'd also like to continue to see a better definition, as Director Velasquez had brought up earlier, of baselining what the problem is, really understanding from the beginning what we need to be working towards and better defining our world. I love the idea of human-centered design because I think that helps get you there. If you can understand your populations, then you can set goals to get there. So permanency, infrastructure, and not just infrastructure, but integration of that. And I think that was something that Dr. Galley really touched on, which is we need to make sure that our systems are integrated to continue to work better together. So that was number one. I'm keeping this short because then it's public comment and we're out of here. For the second discussion, we actually had, I would say we veered off a little bit and didn't discuss so much about the work that we're doing individually, but really looked at what some of our bigger problems are. And I think a lot of it has to do with the cost of building housing and what supportive services come with that housing once it's built. And Director Johnson Hall talked a lot about some of the ways she's looking for those hidden gems. I liked that term. Really kind of turning over every single rock that she can to better understand how expansive can she be, what is allowed within the kind of permissive law and things that she has to go by. I think it comes down to what Dr. Galley said in this discussion, which is we need to be innovative and we need to integrate some sort of innovation and perspective for really being bold and looking at new ways to solve our problems within this plan. And I will end it there. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, I'm hearing a few common themes. I'm hearing shorter, bolder, catchier vision, and I love all of that. We may tap into all of your communications departments to work with us on that. But no, I really do appreciate I'm hearing the desire for boldness, and I think we all really want that and appreciate that and are gonna take that back. I also hear the integration piece, right? Like we're not doing this, or we shouldn't have to be doing this in silos. We should be finding the hidden gems where you can help me and I can help you, and really understanding that our success is dependent on each other's success here. So that was one of our goals for today. So thank you all for such a thorough discussion. And also thank you for appreciating it. I had very little to do with setting this up. So thank you to my team for figuring out how to have small group discussions in a Bagley Keene setting. Really appreciate that. And As I said before, we're really lucky to have both an action plan specialist and a consultant, Matthew Doherty, who's the former U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness Executive Director. They are online somewhere listening and taking furious notes to understand, like, how do we do all of this, take everything that we're hearing into account. So thank you to them, who I'm sure are busy typing away. So with that, we're gonna enter into public comment on this agenda item. If you have public comment specifically on what was shared out just now, this is the time to raise your hand or submit a public comment card. If you have a comment on something that's more general, we will get to general public comment after this. So this moment is for comment on what was just shared. And then if there's something else, we will get to general public comment at the end. Thank you. So Claire, take it away.
Okay, we have three hands raised online. Again, please keep it to this agenda item. You will have 2 minutes to speak. If anybody else would like to speak online, please, okay. We've got a few comments online. Please raise your hand or press *9 if you are on the phone. I will call on the first person, that is Irving Torres. You have 2 minutes. Feel free to speak.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Irving Torres. I work for All Home, which is a regional organization that's advancing regional solutions that disrupt the cycles of poverty and homelessness in the Bay Area. I'm speaking to urge Cal ICH to make homelessness prevention to be included in the state action plan's goals and set strategic direction around funding and scaling these programs. At a minimum, Cal ICH should establish reducing first-time homelessness as a goal within the plan, which is a key proxy for the success of prevention interventions and reducing homelessness overall. Every state agency has a role to play in making strategic investments along the prevention continuum. In the Bay Area, more than 20,000 people experience homelessness for the first time each year, a number that outpaces our system's capacity to respond and keep us from reducing the rates of homelessness overall. Targeted prevention programs are succeeding in reducing homelessness, and early results from All Homes targeted prevention pilots show how an evidence-based approach more efficiently and equitably to where each dollar will have the greatest impact to keep people housed and reduce racial disparities. I want to thank each of you for your leadership, and we urge Cal ICH to make homelessness prevention part of the state goals, action plan goals, and we are eager to support Cal ICH in developing a strategic actionable plan that reflects the concurrent investments we know are needed to prevent and end homelessness in our state. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Irving. The next hand I have raised is Reba Stevens. Please go ahead and speak.
Good afternoon. First, let me begin by thanking our council members for your willingness, your dedication, and commitment to the work. Thank you, Secretary Gallia and Secretary Moss, for your support and your support team for creating a space and environment for our council members to participate as themselves in their authentic voice. This meeting today has been amazing. Targeted outcomes with accountability and transparency. Improve how preventing homelessness in the first place is critically important. And in reference to improving access, I'm thinking about clear, broad advertisement so that those who are housed as well as those who are unhoused know where to go and what to do. Integration of care is critically important. Integration is like a safety net for those of us who utilize services so that we are aware that you are working together and not in silos, which creates frustration oftentimes for us. I do need to uplift the fact that we have to set goals to prevent deaths. People are dying unhoused on our streets every single day. Language is critically important, so I truly appreciate language such as end users versus clients. Together, we can end homelessness. And I think that it's critically important to remember to empower, or the importance of empowering those of us with lived experience. And my last 25 seconds, I think it's really, really important for me to say thank you, but how much I really appreciate today's meeting. It was awesome, just simply awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Reba. And the last hand I have raised for this section of public comment is with the phone number 3713. You have 2 minutes. Please go ahead and unmute.
Hi, this is Ruth. I heard a lot of words, prevention and ending. Ending and preventing homelessness is something that I hear talked about all the time. But like I have specific instances of like a motel that is demobilizing right now, where everybody's going to end up back on the street in a few weeks. And I've called about these sorts of things before. Usually it was only like 1 or 2 people I was trying to advocate for. This time it's a whole motel. I would love it if you would help me try to figure out how to prevent that homelessness or end it, because it seems inevitable right now that that's where it's going to end up back again. These people have been indoors for the better part of a year. They want to stay indoors. They want to transfer to another motel shelter if they can't stay in their current one. So that's an SOS from LA, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. And this concludes this agenda item. And now I will move on to general public comment. So with general public comment, you may make comments on any of the agenda items or otherwise. Again, we will take in person first, of which I have 1 notice, and then we will go to online. Again, if you are online, please raise your hand or press *9 if you are on the phone, and I will call on you. We will, due to the structure of this public meeting, we will not be able to respond to any questions or make any comments at this time, but you can please email us at calich@bcsh.ca.gov. And now I will move on to Ludmilla Bade.
Hello, thank you, Secretaries, Council, and staff, and any of the public who is listening in. Some of the things that I heard in the discussions today were integration, an end user, thrive, and access. I do have some ideas for those. I do want to say I have several concerns. Okay, one of those is actually around Proposition 1. And I am really hoping that that is implemented without a great deal of destruction to community-based mental health and behavioral health services and options that people can easily access in the community. I would find it really difficult and painful if I see like large institutions, people being basically funneled into institutions, especially if there are no community centers, community behavioral health, things where people can easily access that and get just that kind of support. I really want to thank, oh my gosh, I've got so much to say. I do have huge things to say on connecting the dots. Would love to see environmental science included in what we're doing, and people who know environmental stuff, just in order to connect what we're doing with the United Nations sustainability goals, in the way housing is being built, and in the way other things are being handled. Much more on that. Specific things. One of the most important things is we can have a place where we're welcome to go. Those of us who are experiencing difficulties or experiencing homelessness. I would really be wonderful if there could be a template for 211 systems locally that give basically a "you are welcome here" accessing under homelessness. So when you're homeless, you click on the things and you find out, okay, you can go to drop-in centers, warming centers, and other places that welcome people who are homeless to come and drop in there and get help. I have more, but I've run out of time for the moment.
Thank you, Ludmilla. And I have no hands raised online. So, Cody?
Great, thank you. I just want to remind folks, if there's more you didn't get the chance to say, you're welcome to email us, and you can always submit written public comment that we can share out with council members as well. And I just want to take a second to just thank you all again for your thoughtfulness and your time here. I heard a lot of what you all heard. I also heard urgency. I feel like that can get lost in the day-to-day work of like the minutia, right? But I just really appreciate that I heard from a lot of people today how urgent this problem is. And so I appreciate that we are holding that as best we can as we move forward. So, you know, as you can see, we are working hard to move our council towards actionable work with every meeting. And we're able to do so only because of the thoughtful input that you all provide. So thank you for that. Our next council meeting will be on June 12th, 2024 at 1 p.m. We will be in person. We will let you know the location as soon as we have it. I also want to thank members of the public who attended this meeting. We always appreciate your interest around our work on homelessness. And we know that many of you who attend our meetings also are working to address homelessness in your state or local communities. And we appreciate all your efforts. So we hope you listen into our advisory committee meeting as well. And with that, the meeting is adjourned at, I can't see the clock, 4:15 p.m. Thank you all.